So welcome back guys, on your demand we are back with another part of the story. What if Bella chose Alaska over forks? Before that, don't forget to like and subscribe for more such videos, so let's get started on story. BPOV. Bella. It's time to wake up? Edward's velvety voice whispered in my ear, waking me up. I made you breakfast in bed, he continued. I yawned and opened my eyes. Edward was sitting on the bed, holding a tray, and smiling. My stomach filled with butterflies. I felt an urge to hug him, but the tray was in the way. Good morning, I greeted, wiping my eyes. What time is it? Early 6:30. I didn't know what time you wanted to wake up, but I thought perhaps you wanted to study before your exam this morning. I raised my eyebrows. Normally I woke up naturally at least an hour earlier. 6:30 was sleeping late for me. I was glad Edward woke me up. I sat up in the bed and leaned against the headboard. Edward gently placed the tray in my lap. Scrambled eggs, toast and tea, he announced. I looked down at the elegantly arranged meal, cutlery and napkin and then glanced back at Edward. He was waiting, eager to see if I was pleased. I picked up the tray and placed it to the side, then inched over to give Edward a hug. He welcomed me into his arms. Thank you, I said, inhaling his scent and squeezing him tightly. I felt as if I missed him terribly, since we had been separated by my sleeping for 8 hours. You're welcome, he replied softly, but there seemed to be a hint of surprise in his voice. He placed his hand on my forehead, then smoothed back my hair. How are you feeling this morning? I yawned again. I slept well, but still feel kind of tired. I'm looking forward to our vacation. At the thought of extended, uninterrupted time alone with Edward, my heart leapt and I tried not to blush. Vacation wasn't really a word in my vocabulary, but when Edward suggested it, I realized there was nothing else I wanted to do more. I couldn't even attempt to put up a fight or make excuses about responsibility. Alone. With him. My instincts immediately responded yes, please. If he asked me to go away with him forever, I feared I wouldn't be able to resist. Thankfully, he was just asking for a week. Me, too, Edward replied, smiling with glee. I hugged him again. Feeling as though he couldn't be close enough to me, he rubbed my back. Do you want me to pack for you while you eat? Edward asked, breaking away and starting to stand up. You can tell me what you want to bring and I can put it in your suitcase. No, I protested, more at the absence of his touch than packing for me. I grabbed his hand and pulled him back into bed with me. We can pack later, sit with me. Edward was surprised, but obediently returned to me. He sat beside me and as I leaned against him, he put his arm around me. I picked up the tray and put it on my lap and began to eat breakfast. We chatted about the details of travel, deciding to leave immediately after class, and then he quizzed me on my exam. Did you read my textbook last night? I asked with a smile. His questions were helpful, but almost word for word from my reading. I wanted to help you study, he admitted, with a shrug. I sighed, my stomach filled with butterflies once again. I felt overwhelmed, but in a good way. When Edward wasn't annoying me, he was so amazing. His thoughtfulness and care for me was unbelievable. Are you mad? He asked, interrupting my sigh of frustration, which so far in our relationship, it had been. I shook my head, sipping my tea. No, not at all. I just feel lucky. You are so good to me. Again, Edward seemed surprised, but he didn't say anything and only smiled. He looked thoughtful for a moment, then spoke. Did you know it's our anniversary? We met 1 week ago today? I sipped my tea again to cover my smirk. I wondered if we would be one of those couples who celebrated every moment of our relationship. 1 week didn't seem worth of an anniversary, but it had been the most intense week of my life. My feelings for Edward had been confusing and overwhelming. The more time I spent with him, the less confusing it felt, but the intensity didn't subside. In fact, it seemed to increase. The moment we met I felt connected to him, and as the hours and days passed, the stronger that connection felt. 2 days ago I was annoyed that he wouldn't let me go to another room without him, but this morning, the thought of him being out of my sight terrified me. Has it only been 1 week? It feels like I've known you forever. The best week of my existence, Edward replied, confidently, leaning down to kiss my cheek. I could stay in bed with you all day. I immediately blushed at his words, thinking of how nice that would be. But we have to pack, get you dressed and to school and have less than an hour to do so. I glanced at the bedside clock. I never forgot about the time, never, but this morning I wasn't thinking of it at all. Edward was right, I needed to start moving. I yawned again, and thanked Edward for the breakfast. He took the tray as I scooted out of bed. I was in desperate need of a shower. It was a little complicated, living in a dry cabin without any indoor plumbing. On the first floor I had a small closet designed for showering with a water pump, shower hose, pot and propane unit to heat the water. I was embarrassed to realize I hadn't showered since Monday morning and probably smelled horribly. Maybe Edward could pack for me, while I showered? "Can I take you up on that offer to pack while I get ready for the day?" I asked. Rationally, it felt ridiculous to ask a man I just met to choose for me what I would take on vacation, but I felt like Edward and I shared the same brains sometimes. He would know what I liked. He nodded. "Of course, I'm happy to help." Unbelievably, even to me, I hugged him again. I didn't know why I was feeling especially affectionate this morning, but I couldn't help myself. Edward received me warmly and with obvious pleasure, so that helped to ease any embarrassment at my being so needy to touch him. I grabbed a change of clothes and made my way downstairs to shower. I went as quickly as I could, anxious to be with Edward, and when I finished, brushed my teeth and blow-dried my hair, I felt refreshed. Edward was standing in front of the door, waiting for me, and I leapt into his arms. Propriety normally told me to have some restraint, but with Edward the first had very little. Increasingly, my instincts seemed to be overruling everything. "You smell so good," Edward whispered, kissing my neck. However natural it felt to be with Edward, I had to admit the difference in our species was never far from my mind. Vampire, human, supernatural, normal. "My blood really doesn't tempt you?" I asked. We hadn't revisited the long conversation we had about his nature. At that time he assured me he didn't desire to drain me, but he was a vampire. He thirsted for human blood, even if he chose to drink from animals. "I certainly smell it and am aware of it, but I could never hurt you. With other humans, I am tempted and that's why I have to be very careful and hunt regularly. Going away with you will be nice not only to be alone with you, but also to get a breather from, well, temptation." I looked into his eyes, which had darkened. "Will going to my class be too difficult? There would be at least 100 people gathered into a small lecture hall." Edward grinned. "I think I can handle it. I've had decades of practice being around humans. When we arrive in Denali, I'll hunt right away, though. I'm looking forward to some caribou." I wrinkled my nose. "Sounds lovely." He laughed at my response. "Your bag is on the sofa. I packed clothes, sweaters, unmentionables, anything else?" I blushed a deep crimson, realizing Edward had packed my underwear. I wanted to disappear under the floorboards of the cabin. How embarrassing. I should have thought about that. Let me get my toiletries and laptop," I mumbled awkwardly. "That should be it." "Laptop. Are you going to work on vacation?" Edward replied, admonishment in his tone, but I knew he was also teasing me. I continued to feel awkward. "I don't know if I mentioned it, but I'm sort of writing a novel and—" "You're writing a novel?" Edward interrupted. "Can I read it?" He looked genuinely excited. I blushed again. "It's probably not very good. I've been working on it for a while and my creative writing professor agreed to let me use it as my senior project. He's the only one who has read it, and only certain parts. I promise I won't be tied to my laptop, but I thought maybe I could work on it a little. I give you permission to stop me if I get obsessed with it." Which was certainly likely. My writing went through its ups and downs, but when I was in the zone, I could sometimes write hours without stopping. "You didn't answer my question. Will you let me read it?" "Edward," I groaned. "What if you don't like it?" I couldn't handle it. For the first time since I met him, Edward rolled his eyes at me. Usually I was the one who did the eye rolling. "I wouldn't like it, what a preposterous thought. Of course, I will like it. I'm sure it's brilliant." He was completely confident, but I was still wary. "I'll think about it," I offered. He shrugged. "Fair enough, I'm looking forward to reading it." I rolled my eyes this time, at his taking my "I'll think about it" as a yes. I raised an eyebrow. "My computer is password protected," I warned. "You won't be able to access it." Edward smirked. "I won't read it without your permission, Bella." "Okay," I replied suspiciously. He lightly swatted me on the butt and I jumped. "Let's get the human to school, shall we?" Playful Edward. I liked that. I pulled him in for a kiss on the lips and thought I would melt at his touch. However, this morning Edward was being the responsible one, and gently guided me in finishing packing. He helped me put on my coat and I picked up the backpack I used for school. I locked the door to the cabin and Edward carried my suitcase to the car. Although I was increasingly losing any kind of resistance to Edward's wishes, I almost insisted on us taking the bus to the university, as if that proved my independence somehow. But it would be faster, and if we were leaving after my class, it made sense to drive, so I didn't try to protest. We arrived on campus with time to spare. As we walked to class, Edward quizzed me again on key points from my reading. One of his arms was slung around my shoulder and with the other he held my hand. It was almost uncomfortable to walk, and when I paid closer attention, I realized Edward's body language was very tense. His tone of voice was neutral, but he was not his normal smiling, happy, relaxed self. As a couple of students passed by, he even glared at them, but I didn't say anything. Maybe the humans and their blood were tempting Edward more than he would admit. Once in class, Edward walked to the front of the room to introduce himself to the professor. I waited in the back, in my usual seat. While the professor talked briefly with Edward, I noticed a group of girls gawking at him and whispering to each other. Jealousy filled my body and my blood began to boil. Mine, he's mine, I thought. Jealousy was also immediately followed by self-doubt. These girls were way prettier than I was. Why would Edward want to be with me when he could have any girl he wanted? Anxiety overwhelmed me at the thought of being separated from Edward. What if he left? What if he grew bored with me and wanted someone else? He had previously assured me of his love for me, but what if? I put my head in my hands and tried to focus on breathing to calm down. Edward was immediately by my side. "Are you all right?" he asked, full of concern, putting his hand on my back. I straightened up. "I'm fine. Just worried about the exam." Edward looked suspicious, but didn't press me further. "You'll do great," he assured me. My eyes widened. "You didn't bribe the professor, did you?" "Bella, I would never do that," I smirked. "Kidding, just kidding." Edward smiled for the first time since we had been in public and relaxed, but only a fraction. While I was taking the exam, Edward and I didn't hold hands, but he did put his hand on my thigh. His touch was extremely arousing and distracting, but not touching me seemed to cause anxiety for both of us, so it was the only option. For the next 45 minutes, I wrote and wrote and wrote, and when I was finished, I felt confident I had gotten a good grade on the essay exam. It was hard to concentrate when Edward was around, but he seemed to be a good luck charm, too. I went to the front of the class to hand the professor the exam and was dismissed. Edward was waiting for me at the door and helped me put on my coat, as usual. A few students glanced our way and out of the corner of my eye. I could have sworn I saw Edward glaring at them. What was with the glaring? Why was he so annoyed or angry or tempted? As we walked back to Edward's car, it occurred to me that Edward hadn't been home in days. "Do we need to go to your house so that you can pack?" I asked. He shook his head. "Everything I need is already at the cabin." He looked uncertain, as if he wanted to say more, but didn't. "What?" I asked. "Nothing." "Edward," I scolded. "We're trying this communication thing. Remember? What's up?" "Would you mind if we stop by the hospital?" he blurted out. "Are you sick?" I immediately asked, alarmed. He laughed out loud, caught off guard, but then quickly returned to being serious. "No, I'm not sick, but to be honest, I'm worried about you. You're much more tired than you were earlier this week, but you've gotten the same amount of sleep. Your heartbeat has been erratic, your body temperature is much warmer than normal." His obvious concern was endearing. He did look truly worried for me, but I didn't think going to the hospital was called for. That seemed a little extreme. "I'm fine," I urged him, softly, putting my hand on his cheek. "I'm human, our bodies do things like that, but that doesn't mean we need to go to hospital. We don't have to go to the emergency room. Carlisle can examine you. He also really wants to meet you." "He does, of course. He wants to meet the woman who captured my heart." For a brief second, I began to melt before realizing Edward was trying to dazzle me into saying yes. I raised an eyebrow and he smiled, realizing he had been caught. I didn't think I needed to go to the hospital, but I did want to meet Carlisle, especially after hearing so much about him. "I also want to talk to him about us," he continued to admit. Edward rarely, if ever, looked bashful, but in that moment he did. I swallowed nervously. If Edward was thinking the same thing I was thinking, I knew what it was and I would be shy about mentioning it, too. Carlisle was a physician and also a vampire. He was equally educated and knowledgeable about vampires and humans. Did he want to ask Carlyle about whether vampires and humans could have sex? Edward mentioned he couldn't kiss me because of the venom in his mouth. But, what about other places? His perfect body couldn't be entirely poison. I wasn't on birth control because I had never even kissed a man before I met Edward, but there were other forms of protection that could protect me from any secretions. I was inexperienced and, to be honest, not very sexually aware, but my body hungered for Edward. Every kiss, every touch, made me desire him more. Because of our differences, our physical relationship was limited, but Edward did say we would take it a day at a time. He didn't say no. I'd love to meet Carlyle, I replied with a smile. Let's go to the hospital. I expected it to take at least an hour of trying to convince Bella to go to the hospital, and I wasn't going to take no for an answer, but surprisingly she agreed without much protest. She seemed to want to meet Carlyle as much as I wanted her to meet him, and that pleased me. Carlyle was an important person in my life. He was my creator, mentor, friend, father. I hoped Bella liked him and would grow to trust and love him as much as I did. I worried that my protective instincts wouldn't allow Bella to be near Carlyle. He was a vampire after all, but I was making an intentional effort to be rational. Carlyle had a spotless record. He had never tasted human blood. He had more control than the members of our family combined. Bella would be safe with him. Being in public with Bella was becoming increasingly difficult for me due to my concern for her safety. As we walked across campus, I had to stop myself several times from growling at human passers-by. On one level one knew they were harmless, but on a deeper, instinctual level one saw them as a threat. My body was tense and ready to attack. It wasn't until Bella's class was over, and we were in the car, driving to the hospital, that I allowed myself to relax for a moment. Once we arrived, Bella and I held hands as we walked to Carlyle's office, and the tension returned. I tried desperately to not let my body language reveal the protectiveness I felt, but Bella gave me several curious glances. I couldn't even smile and hoped that she was interrupting my behavior as a normal, human man nervous about introducing his girlfriend to his father, rather than the inhuman desires of a vampire who wanted to murder anyone who looked at his mate. I was scanning the thoughts of those in the hospital, and I immediately picked up on Carlyle's. He was in his office, waiting for us to arrive. Alice had warned him, and I would have to thank her for it later. But Carlyle also had an unexpected guest, although I wasn't too surprised about it. Lightly, I knocked on the door of Carlyle's office. He was at his desk, in his chair. Esme was sitting in his lap. When I opened the door, Esme jumped up before Bella could notice. "Edward, don't be angry. I wanted to meet Bella. When Alice told me Carlyle would meet her today, I couldn't resist rushing over here." I stood in the doorway cautiously. Esme was my loving mother, but she was also a deadly vampire who could easily kill Bella. I controlled my instincts, focusing on Esme's excitement. "It's all right, son. We won't hurt her. Leave the door open if you feel you need to make a quick escape." Carlyle wasn't being facetious. He could see my defensiveness and was suggesting a way for me to feel slightly more comfortable. Although I would easily smash through a closed door if I needed to get Bella to safety, having an open door did slightly calm me. "Carlyle, Esme, I'd like you to meet Bella," I greeted, entering the room and pulling Bella to my side. Bella smiled shyly. "Hi, I've heard so much about you both." Carlyle and Esme wanted to shake Bella's hand, but I subtly shook my head. I knew I was being ridiculous, but I didn't want anyone touching Bella but me. "We're delighted to meet you," Carlyle responded warmly. "Alice told me your father is Charlie Swan, the police chief of Forks?" Bella nodded. "Chief Swan is such a gentleman," Esme added. "Always so helpful and nice to our family." "Did you visit Forks often?" Carlyle asked. "A few times as a child, but not very often." Carlyle, Esme and Bella continued with small talk about Forks and Bella's studies at UAF, while at the same time Carlyle and I began our own discussion. As vampires, our minds could process several things at once. I read Carlyle's mind and whispered my questions so quietly Bella couldn't hear. "She's lovely. I'm so happy for you both. What is happening to me, Carlyle? I'm having a difficult time being rational. Instinct is overcoming me. I know you and Esme wouldn't hurt her, but I want to grab Bella and run. Your protectiveness for your mate is natural. I feel it for Esme. I was there when Esme first joined us. I read your mind. You never felt that I was a threat to her. When I was last at home, I almost attacked Jasper and Alice in fear of them hurting Bella." Bella is a human and she's fragile. Because of that you will feel much more protective. You and Rosalie weren't as obsessed with your mates as I am with Bella. The intensity is overwhelming." Carlyle was thoughtful for a moment. Esme added her own thoughts to the conversation. "Carlyle and I were obsessed with each other and still are, Edward. I'm sure every couple just expresses it differently. And believe it or not, we did try to guard our thoughts around you." Esme inadvertently began to think about how excited she was that after all these years I had found someone to love. Her joy was overwhelming. "The difference between me and Esme and Rosalie and Emmett and you and Bella is that Bella is human. Don't underestimate that difference. Although it seems to be a Cullen family tradition, it is not a natural occurrence for vampires to mate with humans. This is a personal question, so don't feel pressured to answer, but have the two of you had relations yet? With any other of my family members, I would have refused to discuss this topic and chosen to be a gentleman, out of respect for Bella. But Carlyle was different. I knew I could talk to him about anything, without judgment. No, I didn't think it was possible. Carlyle's mind was whirling with information, processing different connections. He formulated his thoughts. Esme and I didn't consummate our relationship immediately, but it was only because she was a newborn and distracted by her bloodlust. It was the same with Rosalie and Emmett. However, it seems with other fully matured vampires that have mated, they consummate immediately after meeting. Since Bella is a human and you haven't consummated, until you do so you'll feel excessively and increasingly protective and possessive. I want to consummate our relationship, believe me, I do. But, is it even possible? Wouldn't my venom affect her? What if my animalistic nature takes over and I crush her body? All valid fears. I would suggest taking things slowly. We have been taking things slowly. If I allowed myself to think about how much I wanted to express my love for Bella physically, and yet couldn't, I was overwhelmed with frustration. Let me be frank. You must be careful with your mouth, it is undeniably dangerous. But, if you're gentle and use a condom your secretions can be contained and not infect Bella. Were Carlyle and I really having this conversation? His thoughts were purely medical and scientific, thankfully. Do you have any condoms? I wasn't making a decision. I didn't want to presume that Bella was ready for that next step, but it wouldn't hurt to be prepared. No, but I can get them for you before you leave. Esme's eyes flashed and she looked at me. I wasn't a prude, but I saw Esme as my mother and talking about my sex life with her was not something with which I was comfortable. She was curious, but didn't want to impose. Alice sent me with a package for you. Perhaps it has what you need. I groaned. There were no secrets in our family, especially with a sister who could see the future. But, she was helpful. Thanks, Esme. Don't feel pressured to consummate your relationship with Bella. You need to be attentive to her human needs, particularly her emotional needs. But, I suspect consummating will make being with Bella easier on you. You'll always feel protective and possessive, but it will make being in public less stressful knowing she's completely yours. The conversation was winding down and now that Carlyle had helped me understand my behavior, I needed him to examine Bella. I'm afraid there's something wrong with Bella. She tires easily, her body temperature has increased recently, and her heartbeat is erratic. She insists she's fine, but I'm concerned. Although they thought that I could slightly be overreacting, it warmed me to see both Carlyle and Esme be concerned with Bella's health. I also felt a little guilty for talking about Bella without her knowing it, but I would tell her about my conversation with Carlyle later. She undoubtedly noticed something was going on beneath the surface of our general, pleasant conversation. Esme opened her purse and placed the package Alice had sent on Carlyle's desk in such a subtle way that Bella didn't notice. This is for you, dear. Have a wonderful time in Denali. When you return, please bring Bella home to see us. She's wonderful. I smiled at Esme. Bella noticed me relax slightly and gave me a curious look. I have errands to run, but I'm so glad I was able to meet you in person, Bella. I hope to see you again soon. Please let me hug her, Edward. Esme had been careful to not dwell on Bella's blood and so I cautiously gave my consent with a nod. I let go of Bella's hand and Esme immediately gave her a hug. My new daughter, she thought with delight. It was nice to meet you too, Mrs. Cullen, Bella replied with a smile. Esme frowned. Call me Esme. Mom. Esme, Bella repeated. My mother smiled and turned to hug me. Don't forget to call me, Edward. I worry when I don't hear from you. I will, Mom, I replied dutifully. Bella looked surprised at my response, but covered it quickly. Carlyle walked Esme to the door and gave her a kiss, and then she was gone. He missed her immediately, but was able to channel his thoughts to focus on me and Bella. I initiated the topic of her health. Carlyle, would you mind giving Bella a quick examination? I'm afraid that she's getting sick. Bella rolled her eyes. I'm fine. Edward says I worry too much, but I think he does, too. I put my hand on her forehead. You have a temperature. I neglected to tell Bella I graduated from medical school several times, but I doubted it would make much difference in her believing I was overreacting. Carlyle nodded. A fever usually indicates an infection. Let's indulge, Edward, shall we? He winked and Bella and she smiled, relaxing. I'm going to have to touch her to examine her. Are you all right with this? I nodded. I would endure the tension if it meant finding out what was wrong with Bella. Let's go to an exam room, Carlyle instructed. I grabbed the package from Alice and put it in my pocket, as we followed Carlyle down the hall to an empty room. He greeted a few nurses, introducing us to them, and I put my arm around Bella protectively. Once inside, Bella sat on the examination table, and I sat on a stool beside it, holding her hand. Thank you, I said, knowing Bella was being exceedingly generous in indulging my worry. She squeezed my hand and shook her head in amusement. She opened her mouth so Carlyle could take her temperature. 100 degrees. You do have a fever. I didn't say, I told you so, to Bella, but she looked at me as if she expected me to. I shrugged instead. Carlyle asked her about her medical history, listened to her heart and lungs, checked her blood pressure and reflexes. Bella didn't notice, but Carlyle was also smelling her. The benefit of being a vampire who was a doctor meant that through scent he could pick up changes in the body that human doctors could not. Carlyle was being completely professional in examining Bella's body, which brought me comfort. Had he had any hint of attraction or arousal, I knew I would attack. Hormones are unusually high. Her breasts have swelled, heartbeat rapid, but steady. Ovulation is occurring. Fertile. Carlyle's thoughts were rushing. He looked at me with his eyebrows raised. Bella is in heat. EPOV Bella was in heat? Bella is not an animal, she's human. You cannot tell her that. Edward, did you say something? Bella asked, noticing my lips moving. I looked innocent and shook my head. No, of course, I won't, Edward. But you should talk to her about it. I suspect that mating with you is affecting her physically, much more than I could have imagined. Esme and Emmett were changed immediately after mating. I've never known of human and vampire mates coexisting together. The intensity of the situation is making her unwell. I wasn't able to hide the look of concern on my face. I was making Bella sick. Thankfully, she didn't notice my panic, but Carlyle did. Consummating your relationship may help. Whether she realizes it or not, her body desires you. The mating bond will be official and the intensity will perhaps lessen for her physically. Or it will increase. Carlyle wasn't helping. Increase the intensity. I felt as if I was about to explode. I could only imagine how Bella must be feeling. Have you thought about changing her? Ultimately, that is the only solution. As an immortal, she will be your equal and in no danger of consequences of your bond. Yes, I had thought endlessly about changing her. I wasn't opposed to it completely, but I didn't want to rob Bella of her humanity and her soul. My family made the most of our existence, yet most of us would not have chosen to become a vampire. My father saw the conflict on my face and was compassionate. Being alone with Bella for a week is a good decision. You'll relax knowing Bella is in complete safety and you can think about your options. There is no rush to make a decision. Bella, I am writing you a prescription, Carlyle announced. Am I really sick? She asked. I'm writing a prescription for a vacation? Bella smiled and looked at me. Carlyle was just as cheesy with his jokes as I was. Like father like son, I supposed. Although I haven't taken a blood sample or done X-rays, I believe you're simply exhausted. Your body needs rest. It's not a lie, Carlyle thought to myself. It's true. She nodded. I have been working a lot for years. 1 week in Denali won't solve all your health issues, but I want you to make sure you're eating regularly and sleeping at least 8 hours a day. If you can bear the cold, get fresh air and exercise. Have fun. Okay. The fever is probably due to fatigue. Take Tylenol and it should subside. Carlyle turned to me. Edward, do you feel better now? Yes. No. Carlyle asked about our plans for the week, encouraged us to be safe, handed Bella a small bag of medication, and we were back in my car in the parking lot. I took the package out of my pocket and opened it. It's from Alice, apparently. She sent it to us via Esme. I didn't want to embarrass Bella or make her feel pressured by pulling out a box of condoms, so I quickly put them under the seat and focused on the letter. She wishes us a happy Thanksgiving and wanted us to know she stocked the refrigerator at our Denali cabin with a turkey and all the traditional side items. She insists that we celebrate properly, even if I don't eat. That was thoughtful of her, Bella remarked. I do like to cook. Too bad you can't eat it, though. What? How did Alice know we were going to Denali? You haven't talked to her and we just decided last night. It's convenient to have a sister who can read the future, I explained with a shrug. Well, it can be incredibly annoying at times, but it's helpful, too. Ah, Bella replied, leaning back in her seat. I wondered if sometimes she forgot I and my family were vampires. So far, she'd adjusted to the news remarkably well. She didn't seem to treat me or the others as if we were anything but normal. How long is the drive to your cabin? She asked. About 5 hours, I answered. Shorter if you let me carry you while I run, I added wistfully. I love to run and running with Bella would be extra special. But, temperatures would be below freezing and not easy for her to endure for more than a few minutes. She smiled and I continued. Don't worry, we won't run the entire way, but the cabin is rather remote. I will have to carry you for at least a few miles. I don't mind, she replied, squeezing my hand, and I was aroused at her touch. We carried on a lively conversation while driving, but often Bella would get distracted by the scenery. Even in the darkness, the landscape was captivating. Bella shared about her childhood in Arizona, how the desert compared to Alaska. It hadn't escaped my notice that Bella didn't often talk about her family and she rarely mentioned any friends. Her lack of friendships had to be her choice because she was a wonderful, caring, intelligent person. Her employers thought highly of her, her classmates had a good impression, and her ease and comfort in being sociable with my parents was outstanding. But, why would she choose to not have friends? I was a loner myself, so on some level, I understood that many people preferred to be by themselves. But, I had my family. Bella didn't seem to have anyone. Neither Charlie or Renee called her during the week we were together. Even when I was away from the family, I talked to Carlyle and Esme every day, except since I met Bella. Instead of making my own assumptions, I decided to ask. Are you close to your parents? No, she answered simply. Carlyle and Esme are great, she added, focusing the attention off herself and onto me. But, they're so young. I didn't expect that. When you called Esme Mom, it took me off guard. They are great, I agreed, and I'm lucky to have them in my life. Physically they're young, but their maturity and love for our family is beyond age. It's hard to explain, but they truly are like a father and mother to me. Do they give you an allowance, ground you or do parental stuff like that? I laughed. No, Carlyle is the leader of our family and we respect his wisdom and advice, but we all make our own decisions. No one forces us to do something we don't want to do. Any of us could leave at any time. Free will, you know. Would you leave your family? She asked. If you wanted me to, yes, I replied immediately. It was true. There was no doubt I had a bond with my family, but my bond to Bella was far greater. Bella was visibly surprised. I would never ask you to do that. However, I would ask Bella to leave her family. If she agreed to be changed into a vampire, that's what would happen. In a sense, she had already left her family. Without many friends, either, disappearing from society wouldn't be too difficult at all. It was selfish of me to think this way, but it made me happy. If I asked you to never see your family again, would you? Confusion and panic flashed in Bella's eyes, then amusement. Are you kidnapping me, Edward? I laughed. I'd like to have you all to myself forever, but my family would be upset if I didn't share you with them. I watched the road for a moment and then glanced back at her. Seriously, though, would you? Yes, she breathed, nervously. I don't know why you would ask that, but I trust you completely. Her vulnerability was precious. I wanted to stop the car and ravish her with kisses, but she would freeze to death by the combination of my cold body and the icy Alaskan winter. It occurred to me that we had yet to have the conversation about our future together. I didn't know whether she had considered the possibility of joining me as an immortal. The pain and torture she would have to endure made me nauseated to think about, but having her with me forever was what I wanted more than anything. We drove in silence for a while, holding one another's hand, subdued by the serious tone our conversation had taken. What if Bella refused to become a vampire? What if she was horrified by the idea of becoming one of us? She would eventually die and I would follow her into the afterlife immediately. I would ask the Volturi to execute me. My family would never agree to help me with that. I drove the car as far as the weather and roads would allow, before parking it on the side of the road. Snow would eventually cover it and keep it from being towed away, but I would be able to find it easily. Bella put on her gloves and hat and bundled up, while I retrieved her bag from the trunk. "Ready?" I asked, anxious to hold her in my arms. Would you mind if I rode piggyback style? I think it would make me less nauseous." Before, I carried Bella in my arms as if she was my bride, and that was how I planned to carry her again. However, traveling on my back wasn't a bad option either, and it probably would be more comfortable for her. I kneeled down. "Hop on," I offered, and she climbed cautiously on my back, putting her legs around my waist and arms looped around my neck. When she was secure, I picked up her bag. "I'll start slow," I assured her. "Thanks," she replied, a little shakily, her heartbeat increasing. Through the snow-covered forest, it was a good 10 miles run to reach our cabin. There were no roads reaching it, and building it had been a challenge, but the isolation it provided was priceless. Although we often stayed with our Denali cousins at their estate, which was much more established, this cabin was a family favorite, especially for the couples in the family. Now I understood why. No one would bother us here. I tried not to run too fast, but I also didn't want Bella to be outside for too long, either. If Alice had already been to the cabin to deliver food for Bella, I trusted she had turned on the generator and lit the fireplaces. Our family had no need for warmth, of course, we were comfortable in any temperature, but in the unlikely event a human should visit the property, we still needed to keep up appearances. Thus, Esme insisted on designing the cabin with multiple fireplaces and a moderate-sized kitchen. As the property came into view, Bella gasped. "Are you all right?" I asked, slowly coming to a stop. "You call this a cabin? This is more like a lodge. It's gigantic." I laughed. "Yes, well, our family is large and we need our space. All our homes tend to be spacious. This is actually one of our smaller properties." There was a lake in front of the cabin, which was occasionally used for seaplanes, a common mode of transportation in Alaska. The cabin itself was large, but simple. It had 6 bedrooms and bathrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. Beside the house was a small building that held ski equipment and several snowmobiles. As a family, we had never spent an extended amount of time here, so there was no need for much else. Bella remained on my back, as I tromped through the snow to the door of the cabin. I recognized Alice and Jasper's scent, faint, but recent, and the smell of burning firewood. She really had gone beyond the call of sisterly duty in helping me and Bella. I glanced back at Bella. "Would you indulge me and allow me to do this?" Before she responded, I shifted her from my back to my arms, as I carried her across the threshold of the door. This was a tradition for newlywed couples, but it seemed appropriate. Bella and I were beginning our lives together. In this cabin, I was going to make her completely mine. BPOV. As soon as we entered the cabin, Edward wouldn't take his eyes off me. He was always attentive, but his gaze seemed to be more intense than usual, his touch filled with more meaning. Smoldering would have been a good word to describe his eyes. It made me feel excited and nervous. Within 5 seconds of shedding our coats, we were in each other's arms. Edward's kisses were gentle, but intentional, and he showed no signs of slowing down. We made our way to the living room, where I pulled him down to sit with me on a sofa. I jumped back, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw a blazing fireplace. "Did you start that?" I asked, completely surprised. "Alice did," Edward murmured, nuzzling his face in my neck, and I shivered in pleasure. My body grew rigid. "Is she here?" It's not that I didn't want to see her, but I thought we were going to be alone. I also didn't want her walking in and me and Edward making out. Edward left a trail of kisses along my cheek until his mouth was on mine. "We're alone. She and Jasper were here to prepare the cabin for us, but then they left." I relaxed. "Oh," I sighed and returned my attention to Edward. I draped my arms around his neck and leaned back, drawing him on top of me. I felt every inch of his body against mine and my heart pounded. When I felt him hardened in arousal, my own core became inflamed. "I love you," Edward whispered. I love you, too, I replied, noticing my body was trembling. I felt like I could kiss Edward forever, and we did kiss for what felt like a very long time. His touch was heating me up, as if my body was boiling water. It kept getting hotter and hotter and hotter. Edward's hands were cupping my breasts, caressing my belly. Then they began to roam even further down my body. I felt him unbutton my jeans and his hand went beneath my underwear. Is this all right? He asked, huskily. I nodded, feeling too much pleasure to speak. To be honest, I had never really explored myself before and wasn't sure what Edward was doing. His hand cupped me and his fingers began to massage the region. Edward locked eyes with me, and when I turned my head to avoid his gaze, he used his free hand to bring my eyes back to his. His gentle, cold fingers touching me there felt so personal, so intimate. Edward's eyes were filled with such love and such desire. Touching me seemed to spark something within him. He was looking at me as he was never going to let me go. When I trembled with pleasure and my breathing increased, he increased his speed. I moaned, and he increased even more. I clung to him, my eyes rolling back in pleasure. For a brief, blissful few seconds, I wanted to live in the moment forever. As heat spread from my abdomen to where Edward was touching me, my back arched and I screamed out a guttural sound. Then, I collapsed back on the sofa, and Edward's hands were on my face and he was kissing me. He held me and rolled so that he was on his back and I was lying with my head on his chest. How did you know how to do that? I asked weakly, my body reeling from pleasure. It seemed as though Edward had just given me an orgasm. He may have been just as sexual inexperienced as I was, but he certainly knew what he was doing. I've been to medical school and I read books, he replied, modestly, but I never thought I'd put this knowledge into practice. I'm glad you did, I sighed. That was just wow. I felt like crying because despite the pleasure he gave me, it only left me yearning for more. I felt closer to Edward than ever, but I felt vulnerable and sort of afraid that this was all too good to be true. I hugged him as tightly as I could and he hugged me back. I felt secure in his arms. My breathing calmed and before I realized it, I was deeply asleep. When I woke up, I was in the most comfortable bed I had ever laid in before. Edward hadn't changed me, I was still fully dressed, except my boots were removed. He wasn't with me, which surprised me and made me nervous. Edward, I whispered. The room was dark, but there was a light on in the adjoining bathroom. Within 2 seconds, I felt the bed move and Edward was by side. I gasped with surprise, as I always did when he moved so quickly. He brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. Where did you go? I asked. I was making you dinner. You've only been sleeping for a couple of hours. Tired from the drive, I'm sure. I blushed. Also tired from other things. Are you hungry? I nodded. Starving, actually. Edward scooped me up in his arms. He rubbed his nose against mine and I giggled. As he led me to the kitchen, I noticed he had a candlelight dinner prepared for us, except I was the only one with a plate of food. He placed me in the chair, kissed my cheek, then sat across from me. Bon appetit, he greeted. I smiled and began to eat. It was a simple meal, chicken and vegetables, but it was very good. For someone who doesn't eat, you're a very good cook, I remarked between mouthfuls. Thanks. I looked up the recipe online, but I had no idea if I was preparing it correctly. It doesn't smell very appetizing to me. Oh, I'm sorry, I replied, feeling guilty he had to put up with my humanness. He shook his head. Don't be sorry, you smell delicious. My eyes widened and he winked. He may not want to drink my blood, but he was still aware of it. A reminder to me that as similar as I felt like we were not the same. When will you eat? Edward looked thoughtful. I was thinking of hunting tonight, while you slept. I don't want to leave you, but it's too cold for you to join me for an extended period. Extended period? I repeated. How long did he have to be gone when he hunted? He squeezed my hand. I won't be gone long, just a few hours. You won't even realize I'm gone. I tried not to show my disappointment, but it was hard. Edward noticed my forced smile. An hour, he clarified. I'll only be gone an hour. I sighed in relief. Good. Would you go while I'm awake? I sleep better when I know that you're with me. He nodded. Of course. Whatever you wish. We talked while I ate and decided he would hunt after dinner. I would spend the time writing and when he returned we would watch a movie. He insisted on washing the dishes when I finished dinner, and I sat on the counter watching him work, feeling a little in awe at the perfect man standing before me. I walked him to the door and he lingered before leaving, kissing me passionately, leaving me breathless. When he disappeared into the night, I missed him desperately. EPOV hunting without Bella was a ridiculous idea. As soon as I left her, my body felt like it had been torn into pieces. But I couldn't very well have her with me in a blizzard and below freezing temperatures. She was comfortable, well-fed and safe. I was staying within a few miles of the cabin in order to monitor any human or vampire thoughts that might come on my radar. It was silent and that made me feel better, but not by much. I missed her. Yet, I needed to hunt. The bear I drained a week earlier did not satisfy my appetite. If I overindulged that evening, I would be well fed for a solid 2 weeks before needing to hunt again. Although I didn't desire her blood, being well fed also helped my self-control. It was my instinct and intention to take Bella and claim her as mine as soon as we entered the cabin. Thankfully, the shreds of my humanity shouted at me to pay attention. I knew I needed to take our relationship to the next level, but making love to her in such a rush wouldn't have been ideal. Bella deserved romance. She deserved to be wooed. So, I compromised with my animalistic self. Instead of going all the way, I went halfway. It pleased me to please Bella. She felt good and I was surprised at my control, although as soon as she was asleep I had to go to the bathroom and take care of my own needs. The act seemed to forge a deeper bond between us, if that was possible. My existence felt fragile and unstoppable all at the same time. I focused on quenching my thirst and didn't attempt to play with my food, which I normally did when hunting with my brothers. Caribou and deer were abundant and I drank until I couldn't contain another drop. I looked at my watch. It took less than an hour. I would return to Bella early. My beautiful human was asleep on the sofa, computer in her lap, when I returned. I was tempted to read what she had been writing, but I didn't want her to feel betrayed. I picked up the laptop, clicked to save the document, then closed it and placed it on a side table. "Bella, love, I'm home," I whispered, kneeling next to her. It had been a long day, perhaps she needed to remain sleeping. She woke, looking confused, and sat up quickly. She was so adorable, half asleep. "You're home," she repeated and reached out for me. I stood and scooped her up so that she was sitting in my lap. I smoothed her hair. "Do you want to go to bed instead of watching a movie?" I asked. It didn't matter to me either way. Whether it was sleeping or a movie, I'd still be watching her. "Can we watch a movie in bed?" she asked, yawning. "Your wish is my command," I replied, picking her up and carrying her up the stairs. I seemed to be carrying Bella often, and wondered if it annoyed her. I knew she was capable of walking, but I loved holding her in my arms. We returned to my suite, which luckily was the only bedroom amongst our family properties that actually had a bed. "Do you want to get changed for bed while I set things up for us? I put your bag in the bathroom." Bella nodded, gave me a kiss on the cheek, and I set her down. I watched her walk to the bathroom, then within the next minute set up a 58 inches plasma TV and DVD player at the foot of the bed. I didn't actually watch a lot of television or movies normally, and there wasn't one in my suite, but I borrowed both from Rosalie and Emmett's room. By the time Bella finished changing, I was sitting on the bed waiting for her to return to me. Bella emerged from the bathroom in her pajamas, her hair brushed and she was smelling extra nice. She was fully awake now and looked a little nervous. I opened my arms to welcome her, but she looked at me curiously. "You're not changing?" she asked. I looked down at my clothes and shoes, confused. "You have pajamas, right?" "Well, I don't sleep so no, I actually don't have any pajamas." "Oh." Bella was displeased. "Do you want me to change?" "No, it's okay. I just want you to be comfortable." I wanted to tell her that I was comfortable no matter what I wore. If she wanted me to change, I'd prefer to be nude, but that might intimidate her. She was wearing the nightgown I loved so much and I was wearing jeans and sweater, my boots laced up tightly. I could understand why she didn't think I was comfortable, compared to what she was wearing. I stood up. "Just give me 1 second. I ran to Jasper and Alice's room and borrowed a pair of Jasper sweatpants, since we were close to the same size. I tore off my sweater and left on my white undershirt. I took off my boots, but left on my socks. When I returned to present myself to Bella, she greeted me with her mouth open in shock. "What? Am I wearing the wrong thing?" Bella swallowed and seemed to stutter. "And no, that's perfect. You look nice." "Thanks," I replied with a grin, walking towards her. But, you did take longer than 1 second, more like 5 seconds, she teased, recovering from whatever had stunned her. I squeezed her behind, and drew her close to me. Don't be a smart aleck, I cautioned. She grinned and hugged me, then took my hand and led me to the bed. So, what movie are we watching? She asked. I turned on the television and DVD player, which had over 300 movies in its memory. We have scary, comedy, drama, romantic, adventure. This is Emmett's DVD system and he has quite a variety to choose from. Adventure would be good. What do you have? I scrolled down the list. At the same time we both said out loud, Indiana Jones. We laughed. Temple of Doom or Raiders of the Lost Ark? I asked. Temple of Doom, we both answered again at the same time. Bella lightly tapped my arm. And you said you couldn't read my mind. I can't, honestly. Great minds just think alike. I ran to turn off the lights, then returned to the bed and pressed play to start the movie. I wrapped an extra blanket around Bella before she snuggled up against me, to ensure she would remain warm against my cold body. Together, we watched the movie, laughing at the same parts, quoting the same lines. This is what it feels to be human, I thought to myself. Wearing pajamas, watching a movie in bed, cuddling with the woman with whom I wanted to spend the rest of my existence. This is what it feels like to be in love. BPOV. I was enjoying my time with Edward more than I thought possible. Being with him made me happy, being alone with him made me even more happy. I felt a sense of freedom not having to go to class, do homework or go to work. My solitary, independent life seemed to have disappeared and now my life was fused to Edward. Our worlds revolved around one another. Things would be different when we returned to Fairbanks. I knew this without a doubt. We had been in Denali for several days and my relationship with Edward had physically progressed, much to my delight. Kisses, while still close-mouthed, were placed everywhere. Clothing had begun to be removed. Caresses and gentle touches were given in delicate areas. Edward even started giving me full-body massages, which made me relax to an almost zombie-like level. It all felt natural and right. I felt safe and comfortable with Edward, but we had yet to go all the way. We both seemed to be pushing the boundaries and I hoped and expected that all this build-up was leading to something. Every moment wasn't spent in one another's arms, although a good deal of time was devoted to that. We also had other fun, watching movies, reading together, playing cards. Edward couldn't cheat because he couldn't read my mind. A few times we took the snowmobile for a spin and Edward let me drive. I was even able to write, not for a school deadline, but for my own pleasure. Edward played the piano while I finished a chapter and it was inspiring. On Thanksgiving we cooked together and Edward insisted on setting the table as if a dozen people were coming over for dinner. He didn't eat, of course, but it was still very special. In the evening I called Renee and Charlie to check in. It was tradition to call on holidays and birthdays. Renee noticed an excited, happy tone in my voice, but I didn't mention I was celebrating Thanksgiving in a cabin deep in the woods with a man I just met. Charlie wasn't home, probably at La Push with his friends, so I left a message. I felt a little melancholy after talking and not talking to my parents. It was hard not to compare them to Carlisle and Esme. While they were gorgeous, young-looking, adoptive parents and vampires, there was still an undeniable closeness between them and Edward. I noticed the love they showed him when we met, in the way they spoke to him and looked at him with pride. I knew my parents loved me, but they had never looked at me that way. I rarely spent time with my parents, but Edward had a dozen stories about the quirks of Carlisle's personality or special times he'd had alone with Esme. While Edward cleaned up the kitchen, I sat in a chair, thinking of these things, while watching the snow fall outside. Completely distracted, I didn't notice that Edward was finished until he came up behind me and kissed my neck. Warmth spread throughout my body at his touch and I craved more of him, but my brain didn't follow. Edward instantly noticed I wasn't responding and kneeled in front of me, putting his hands on my thighs and leaning his head against mine. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing's wrong. I was just thinking of your family. Carlisle and Esme. They're really nice." He nodded and paused. "I want them to be your family, too." I blushed. Was he referring to marriage? I wanted to be with Edward for as long as I lived, but the idea of getting married was not appealing in any way. Renee and Charlie married young and it crashed and burned. "I don't want to get married," I confessed, awkwardly. I hoped I didn't hurt his feelings, but I didn't want to presume he was thinking of marriage if he wasn't. "I want to marry you," Edward responded. But I'll wait until you're ready if you're ever ready. Edward wanted to marry me. Wow. I blushed again in surprise. And if I never want to be married, would you leave? He looked offended and took my hands into his. I will never leave you, Bella, whether you want to be married or not. I don't need a wedding ceremony to commit myself to you. I'm already tied to you, till death do us part. His words should have been comforting, but they only caused my eyes to fill with tears. That's the thing. I will die one day and you won't. I can't bear the idea of being separated from you, even by death. It was sudden and irrational, but my emotions were real and strong. Edward was immortal and I was not. I could enjoy these moments we were sharing, but one day he wouldn't be with me anymore. The thought made me inconsolable. Edward picked me up and carried me to bed. I curled up into a ball and he held me until I calmed down. How embarrassing. I'm sorry for being such a mess, I whispered quietly, my voice hoarse from crying. If I could cry I would express myself the same way as you did at the thought of us being separated. It's my greatest fear. Edward was being too nice. I was sure he didn't feel the same way I did. I rolled over so that we faced one another. I'm being sensitive, I think I'm PM Singh, I explained dismissively. Edward's eyes raised in surprise and I wondered if I offended him by talking about my period. It was crude to admit, but if Edward and I were going to get more physical, I hoped it was before I started. Otherwise, I didn't know how that would work, especially with a partner who was a vampire that thirsted for blood. Even though he told me I wasn't a temptation, I didn't want to make him uncomfortable. Also, wouldn't it be messy? You're aware that you're ovulating? He asked, almost clinically. I was confused by the question. I guess. I don't always keep track of it, but I sort of just know when it's around that time. Carlisle sort of mentioned that you were, so I'm surprised. I was mortified. Carlisle knew I was about to start my period and told you. What? First of all, that is so embarrassing, and second of all, why? Edward now looked embarrassed. He told me to talk to you about it, but the timing hasn't been right. Along with a need for rest, it was also another explanation of your symptoms, fatigue, heartbeat, temperature. Okay. But why would he tell you? This must happen to me every month, it's normal for human women. Edward seemed to search for the right words. It's more complicated than that because of our relationship, we're not the same species and I was afraid of how physically that would affect you. Oh. Edward did ask Carlisle about sex and I didn't even notice. How did I miss that? Now I was searching for the right words. And did he say if it was okay if we... How could I be ready to have sex if I wasn't ready to say the word out loud? Edward smiled shyly. Carlisle gave me some technical advice and Alice gave me some protection. I blushed yet again. I knew there wasn't anything to be ashamed about, but Edward getting advice on sex from his father and condoms from his sister was just unexpected. They were definitely a very close family. Butterflies of excitement filled my stomach. So are we going to try? I asked quietly. If you want to, yes. There was an awkward pause as we stared at one another in silence. I do, I whispered. Do you? Yes, Edward groaned, his eyes ablaze with passion. I swallowed nervously. Edward wanted me and I wanted him. My heart began to beat wildly. Edward pressed his hand against my chest, which only made it thump harder, and leaned in to kiss me. Do you want to prepare for bed? He whispered, and I felt his breath against my lips. Yes, I sighed. It was finally happening and I was completely ready for it. Edward helped me off the bed and I walked into the bathroom and shut the door. Trying not to squeal with anticipation, I quickly undressed and put on my nightgown. I chose to leave my underwear off, which made me blush even though I was alone. I needed to get over the embarrassment. I was about to have sex with the man I loved. I brushed my hair, washed my face and brushed my teeth. I looked at myself in the mirror, knowing that after this night, everything would be different. Slowly, I opened the bathroom door and saw the bedroom illuminated with candles. Edward was waiting for me in bed and his shirt was off. I paused for a moment, taking in his beauty and perfection, and Edward stood up and walked towards me. My eyes widened and I had to bite my lip to stop from gasping. He was completely naked and he was huge. Edward caressed my cheek and leaned in to kiss me. I felt him harden and looked down to see him fully aroused. Although I had touched it before, I had never seen his erection. It was a little intimidating, to be honest. But I appreciated the fact that Edward was the one who took initiative, who exposed himself completely to me first. He lifted me into his arms and carried me to bed. My heart was pounding as he crawled on the bed to place me in the center. He put his hands on my waist and touched the hem of my nightgown. Edward looked at me as if he was asking permission, and I nodded. I raised my hands as he pulled it off of me. For a moment, we sat staring at one another, both of us completely naked. I felt vulnerable, nervous, excited, and completely turned on. I leaned back and Edward straddled my torso, taking a long look at my body. "You're so beautiful," he whispered. I smiled shyly, not knowing how to respond. He began a trail of kisses from my abdomen, to my belly, my breasts and neck, until he reached my mouth. My body was on fire from the sensation of his cold lips touching my warm skin. I tangled my hands in his hair, then rubbed them along his shoulder blades and responded with my own kisses. I had learned he liked to especially be kissed behind his ear, so I started there first. He moaned in pleasure and I licked and sucked on his neck, running my hands along his perfectly chiseled chest. "I love you so much," I moaned, feeling overwhelmed with devotion. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would be experiencing such an intimate act with such a wonderful and complex man. "I love you," he responded, as his hands found my nether regions. I gasped. Edward had been more than generous in pleasuring me. This night was for him as well. "I want to pleasure you," I offered, reaching down to touch him. Edward seemed to be in deep concentration. "You first, then me," he breathed. I nodded and leaned my head back, putting my hands in his hair, as he kissed my breasts and worked magic with his fingers. After I orgasmed several times and was exhausted with bliss, Edward pulled himself up and looked directly into my eyes. "Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded vigorously. Although a man had never been inside me, instinct was screaming for Edward to enter me now. He sat back and in a blur I saw him touching himself. Was he? For protection, he leaned down and whispered into my ear. I nodded and braced myself for impact. I was moist and ready. My body was trembling with desire as he entered me. He was gentle and slow and it wasn't as uncomfortable as I expected. Maybe all the pleasuring Edward had given me with his fingers had prepared my body for his entry. It was tight, but it was right. I didn't expect the moment to be so emotional. I closed my eyes and held back my tears as Edward began to move in and out of me. He grunted. I arched my back in pleasure as his tip hit a spot inside me that made me shake with excitement. Our breathing increased and we both panted heavily. Then tension began to build and build, each thrust bringing me more and more pleasure. I met his thrusts with my own, and our eyes locked. It was the most intimate moment of my entire life. My eyes rolled back and I couldn't see, hear or think about anything. Edward gave out a loud and long groan and then collapsed on top of me. Within half a second, he rolled over to the other side of the bed, and I felt his absence like a punch in the stomach immediately. But he quickly returned, pulling me on top of him. I laid my head on his chest as he held me. "Sorry that was so fast," he apologized. "It was wonderful," I breathed. "We did it. I'm still alive." I heard his chest rumble with a laugh. "Yes, we did. I love you, Bella. This is only the beginning." I was exhausted, but still very much full of desire. I craved Edward and our intimacy only made me hunger for him more. "Can we try again?" I asked shyly. Edward looked at me with surprise. "Are you sure? You're not too tired?" "No, I'm ready." A mischievous smile covered his face and he rolled us over, so that he was on top of me again. He kneaded my breasts and pressed his pelvis against mine. I moaned with desire. I didn't need the foreplay. I needed him in me immediately. My hands grasped for his member and I sat up a bit, so that we were aligned, and I guided him into me. He felt like home. I wrapped my legs around his waist and pushed my torso up, so that I could feel him go deep inside me. Edward smiled in pleasure, as he held my waist and looked at me with love and awe. Then something happened. Although he remained inside me, Edward's eyes glazed over and the butterscotch color turned to dark black. For the first time since meeting Edward, I became deathly afraid. "Edward," I stammered. "What's wrong? Did Edward forget to wear a condom?" I lifted my head and recognized he was wearing one. If that wasn't a problem then, why was he frozen like a statue? "Edward," I whispered, trying not to panic. His eyes flashed, but they remained black. He pulled out of me and scooped me up in his arms in a blur. I grew dizzy from the quick movement. He cradled my naked body against his and began to growl. It was deep and loud, and when I looked into his eyes, it wasn't the Edward the first recognized. The man holding me was fully a vampire, fully a monster. My heart pounded. Edward was holding me gently, almost protectively. I realized that he thought I was in danger. His eyes moved back and forth wildly, focusing on something I could not see. The muscles in his body seemed to have expanded, they were flexed and alert. He roared and I covered my ears with my hands. I was scared. For a moment, his humanity seemed to return. He carried me to the bathroom and quickly dressed me, even putting on my shoes by himself before I even realized what he was doing. He was so quick, it only took a few seconds. Then, he carried me to his closet and he dressed in a blur. The whole time, I tried to make eye contact with him, tried to get him to speak to me, but he was silent. After we were both dressed, he carried me to the living room. His body remained tense and a growl repeatedly rumbled through his chest. Was he taking me somewhere? He seemed to be deciding. But we didn't leave. He placed me in a chair against a wall in a corner and stood in front of me, his arms crossed, like a prison guard. The cell phone in his pocket started to ring, but he didn't answer it and he didn't respond to my insistence that he answer it. After a minute of it ringing non-stop, I reached forward and carefully took the phone out Edward's pocket and looked at the caller ID. Jasper. Edward's brother. Hello? I answered shakily. Bella? The male voice asked, surprised. Where is Edward? I was on the verge of tears. He's right here, but he's kind of freaked out. I don't know what's happening to him. This is Jasper. Can I talk to him? I don't think he will. He won't talk to me at all. I don't understand. Why is he acting this way? Jasper sighed. Damn, I was right, he muttered to himself. In a few minutes, maybe sooner, you'll have visitors. Stay where Edward has put you and don't move. Whatever happens, don't move, okay? I started to panic. What are you talking about? Visitors, don't move. Are we in danger? My family and I will be there as soon as we can. Edward will protect you. Everything will be all right. I was silent. Bella? Everything will be all right. Jasper repeated his words, trying to calm me down. Okay. Now repeat what I just told you. Whatever happens, don't move. Correct. We'll see you soon, Bella. Be safe. Click. The line went dead. Be safe. What did that mean? I stood up and hugged Edward from behind, leaning my head against his back. Touching him calmed me down slightly, but adrenaline was still racing through my system. I heard a door open and electricity filled the air. I peeked out from behind Edward and saw 3 vampires standing before us. There were 3 vampires standing before us. I knew they were vampires because their eyes were blood red. I shivered in fear because blood red eyes indicated they weren't like my Edward who drank from animals. These were the type of vampires who drained humans. The 3 vampires before us were 2 men and a woman. They looked past Edward to stare directly at me, their expressions full of curiosity and excitement. I clung to Edward. His body was tense and I wondered if I should sit back down, but I was too nervous to let go of him. Tanya was right. You do have a human pet. Are you going to share? The dark-skinned one asked, chuckling. Edward growled and the vampire looked surprised. He glanced at the man standing to his left. If you don't leave now, I will kill you, Edward replied. The calmness with which he spoke did not match the rigidity of his body. I will kill all of you. The dark-skinned vampire raised his hands. I was misinformed. And I do not wish to fight. He glanced at me with a look of disappointment and Edward hissed. The sound was Jungle Cat, fierce and protective. We will leave, he added, trying to appease Edward, taking a step backwards. The other man and woman remained standing, not as intimidated by Edward as the first vampire. She is mouth-watering, the man remarked. I understand the attraction. The woman giggled and wrapped her arm around the man's waist. They were a couple, obviously. James, let's go, the vampire commanded, continuing to take steps back, not turning his back to Edward. He's not going to share, and do you really want to start a war with his coven? James shrugged. I'm not going anywhere, Laurent. The one called Laurent looked at Edward, repeated his words from earlier, I was misinformed, I do not wish to fight, and then disappeared in a blur. Your coven isn't here with you now, James taunted Edward. It's 2 against 1, Victoria and I want her. Edward growled and I was suddenly hugging the air. Terrified, I inched back into the chair behind me. Jasper told me not to move. Even though my instincts were telling me to run, I decided to do what Jasper said. Somehow, He knew this would happen, and I chose to trust that he would know how I could stay safe during a vampire attack. The scene unfolding in front of me was hard to decipher. It was a blur of quick movement. Edward lunged at James and threw him across the room, smashing into the kitchen counters. The woman ran towards me, but Edward caught her and tore off her arm in the process. I closed my eyes in fear and covered my ears. The booming sounds were like the colliding of boulders or granite cracking. It was overwhelming. I was worried for Edward, not sure how he would defend himself and me against two ferocious vampires. I felt so helpless. Was this the end for us both? How would we survive? I heard the crash of glass and opened my eyes to see Laurent at my side. He hadn't really left. I screamed. Edward. It happened so quickly. I looked at Edward, he looked at me, and Laurent grabbed my hand. There was a flash of red hair and I felt razors plunge into my arm. Excruciating pain broke my gaze with Edward and I glanced at the source of my pain. Victoria was sucking my blood. I struggled to maintain consciousness as I felt life drain from me. My eyes rolled back and I collapsed as I heard the sound of thunder. It was followed by screaming, my own, but also the screams of others. I stared up at the ceiling and realized Victoria no longer had her teeth in me. Writhing in pain, my blood feeling like it was boiling, I desperately hoped Edward had made his escape. It was too late for me, but not too late for him. I was alone, but something was happening around me. I heard odd sounds. Stone being chiseled, glass breaking, snapping, and breaking. It was hard to describe, but the screaming stopped and there was silence. My heart pounded and I began to cry. Was Edward safe? Were the others coming to finish me off? Someone was holding me in their arms. It hurt to be moved and I cringed in pain. A hand stroked my face and I looked up. Edward. You're alive, I managed to mumble. The boiling feeling in my veins made it hard to speak. His beautiful face calmed me slightly, although his eyes were still black and fierce. He didn't say anything, but paused for a moment to look at me. Then, he kissed me on the cheek and began to walk towards the demolished kitchen. He reached in a drawer and got a box of matches, then carried me to the center of the living room. On the floor laid a pile of dismembered body parts. I saw arms, legs, and the detached heads of James, Laurent and the one who had bitten me, Victoria. I was in too much pain to scream, but I was terrified at the sight. It was horrific. Edward had done this? All by himself? Edward lit a match and tossed it into the pile. It immediately ignited into a roaring fire, the body parts seemingly very flammable. Satisfied when every piece was burning, Edward grunted. Despite a coma-like state threatening to overtake me, I had enough rational thought to realize that Edward was not only burning these vampires, but he was also burning down the entire house. He took me upstairs to his bedroom and I felt panic. We needed to leave. The house would soon be on fire. But we didn't stay long. In a blur, Edward wrapped me in a blanket, maybe several blankets, and then with me in his arms, jumped out the window and began to run. I had no idea where we were going. My eyes were open, but I was as limp as a rag doll, not being able to speak or move at all. While Edward was running, I groaned in agony several times, and each time I did Edward would kiss me on the forehead. His touch did not bring relief. I lost my sense of time, but I noticed when Edward stopped running and we were in front of a lodge. It looked like a hotel, but there was no driveway, no cars. He laid me on a bench on the porch, kissed me fully on the lips, then left. I began to cry at his absence. Why was he leaving me? In the distance I heard friendly chatter, then silence, and the same sound of snapping and breaking I heard earlier. Screaming and yelling began and within a second I was in Edward's arms and he was running again. The burning feeling in my veins started slowly, but now it was a raging fire. I closed my eyes and wished for death. Jasper's Pav. Are you surprised? Alice insisted we visit our cousins for the Thanksgiving holiday. She loved any excuse to celebrate or have a party, so I indulged her. I enjoyed spending time with Eliezer and Carmen, as well as Tanya, Kate and Irnia. There was always interesting conversation and the comfort of being with others of our kind who followed our vegetarian diet. Not wanting to miss out on the fun, Emmett volunteered on coming with us, along with Rosalie who had no objections. Being out of the house also gave our adoptive parents, Carlisle and Esme, time to be alone, which all couples in the family appreciated. As soon as we arrived at the lodge, the four of us tensed, picking up the scent of 3 unfamiliar vampires. My years of war in the south, fighting other vampires for territory, made it difficult for me to trust any vampires other than my mate. It took years to fully trust the Cullens, then even more years to trust the Denali clan. But, it was also a natural reaction for a vampire to be cautious when meeting other vampires. You never knew what would happen. Slowly, we approached the front door. It opened and Kate and Tanya were saying goodbye to 3 vampires, 2 men and a woman. They were definitely nomads, blood-red eyes, tattered clothing, barefoot. A breeze brought our scent their way and one of the men snapped his head in our direction. I squeezed Alice's hand, ready to fight if need be. The man stared at Alice, strong emotions of surprise and amazement overcoming him. He hid it well, however, and turned his attention back to the conversation the other man and Kate were having. Our cousins are here, Tanya announced. Welcome, our visitors were just leaving, but let me introduce you. Emmett glanced at me. He was the friendliest and most easygoing of all our family, but even he detected something untrustworthy about this trio. I nodded quickly, acknowledging that it was okay to approach. I sent a wave of calm towards the nomads, carefully gauging their emotions. Tanya introduced Laurent, James and Victoria. I did not like the fascination and possessiveness James was feeling towards my mate. It wasn't sexual, it was as if Alice was an object that belonged to him. It was obvious James was a stranger to Alice, but Alice did not seem to be a stranger to him. Odd. As Kate introduced me and my family, Laurent was intimidated as he noticed my battle scars and Emmett's size, and he did not underestimate Rosalie or Alice, either. James and Victoria felt mostly indifferent, although both of them were radiating contempt. It was a common reaction when nomadic vampires noticed our butterscotch-colored eyes and realized we did not drink from humans. Our cousins must have shared news of our diet with them. It gave them the false assumptions that we were weak. But, we were not. Where is Edward? Tanya asked, confused he wasn't with us. For decades she had been trying to seduce him and was always rejected. It didn't stop her from continuing to try, however. She knew Edward had met Bella. Esme called days before and told them Edward had found his mate. She was a proud mother, after all. He's with Bella, Alice explained, with glee. She hadn't spent much time with Bella, but she already loved her like a sister. Tanya snickered. Edward has a human pet, she explained to the nomads. They laughed politely, but I wasn't sure if they realized she was being spiteful. All 3 of them felt impressed, and curious. Emmett rolled his eyes. It was nice to meet you, he said with uncharacteristic insincerity. Goodbye. I glared at James, who continued to sneak glances at Alice. Thank you for your hospitality, Laurent told Tanya with a bow, realizing they were no longer welcome. We'll be on our way. He spoke with authority and James and Victoria nodded their goodbyes, as well. The 3 disappeared into the dark Alaskan evening. Tanya slapped Emmett's arm. You didn't have to be so rude, she admonished. Rosalie gave her a look, and Tanya stepped back. Sorry, Rose. But, really, Emmett, those 3 are just harmless nomads. Bella isn't Edward's pet, she's his mate. Show some respect, he replied and made his way into the lodge, Rosalie and Kate following him. Soon there were sounds of laughter as they began talking to Eleazar and Carmen. Tanya shrugged and turned to join the others. I stayed with Alice on the porch. Do you see anything? I asked. I don't trust those 3. Alice focused for a moment and shook her head. They haven't made any decisions, they seem to be wandering. Maybe they'll go to Fairbanks, maybe they'll stay in Denali. I want you to have a good time tonight, but keep watch on them. I don't like how James was looking at you. She smiled and stood on her tiptoes to wrap her arms around my neck. Are you jealous? How cute. I shook my head. He felt like he knew you, something was strange about it. Noticing my seriousness, Alice became more somber. I've never met him before, but I'll keep watch and tell you if they do anything suspicious. Good. Thank you. Alice gave me a kiss on the lips and then pulled me into the house. Conversations and laughter dominated the evening, but I remained subdued. The emotions around me were relaxed and happy, but inside I was feeling uncomfortable. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen. Hours later, in the middle of a competitive game of poker, Alice snapped into a trance. We were all used to these episodes, but usually such a focused concentration meant Alice was seeing something serious about the future. We stopped our game and waited expectantly. Alice began to shake. Edward, Bella, it may be too late. I pounded my fists on the table. I knew immediately what had happened. Damn it, I yelled and whipped out my cell phone, dialing Edward's number, hoping I was wrong. It rang and rang until a scared Bella answered the phone. Bella? I asked, surprised. Where is Edward? He's right here, but he's kind of freaked out. I don't know what's happening to him. This is Jasper. Can I talk to him? I don't think he will. He won't talk to me at all. I don't understand. Why is he acting this way? I sighed. Damn, I was right, I muttered. Edward had undoubtedly picked up their thoughts as the nomads approached the cabin and lost his shit, knowing his mate was in danger. My emotions had been trying to tell me, but I hadn't been able to make the connection until now. The nomads believed Tanya when she referred to Bella as a human pet. It was rare, and required tremendous control, but there were some vampires who kept humans to feed on them, only they kept them alive. It was painful and cruel to the human. That's why the nomads had been impressed. They thought Edward was keeping Bella to feed on her, and probably wanted to witness this rarity and maybe even have a taste for themselves. Certainly they hadn't found many humans to find on in the Denali wilderness in the wintertime. In a few minutes, maybe sooner, you'll have visitors. Stay where Edward has put you and don't move. Whatever happens, don't move, okay? What? What are you talking about? Visitors, don't move. Are we in danger? My family and I will be there as soon as we can. Edward will protect you. Everything will be all right. When Bella didn't respond, I repeated myself. Bella, everything will be all right. Okay. Now repeat what I just told you. Whatever happens, don't move. Correct. We'll see you soon, Bella. Be safe. I hung up the phone. Emmett and Rosalie were already standing. What's going on? Carmen asked, concerned. The nomads found Bella and Edward, Alice answered. There will be a fight. We have to leave now. She looked at our cousins expectantly. Eliezer and Carmen stood up. Yes, we'll come with you. Tanya was annoyed. I'm not going to help that human, she spat. Rosalie didn't say anything, but her emotions told me that she agreed with Tanya. I glanced at her in surprise and she shrugged. I'm going to help, Edward. Kate and Irnia took Tanya by the shoulders and into the next room, obviously displeased at her lack of loyalty. We don't have time to beg Tanya to help, Alice screamed. Come with us or not, we have to leave now. She grabbed my hand and we bounded out of the lodge, running towards the family cabin. Emmett and Rosalie immediately followed, along with Carmen, Eliezer, Irnia and Kate. Apparently, Tanya really had decided to stay home. Bitch. We saw the flames of the burning cabin miles before we arrived at the property. Alice screamed and we all began to run even faster. Our panic was overwhelming. Even Rosalie was beside herself. We're too late, his body would have been burned up by now, Rosalie sobbed. Emmett put his arm around her, overcome with his own sorrow. I tried to remain calm, and send the others calm, my years of military training and practice trying to make sense of what was happening. We don't know who is in there. Eliezer, Carmen, check the perimeter for sense. Irenia, Kate, Emmett, Rosalie. Let's keep the fire from spreading to the forest. Alice, Darlin, check to see what's being decided. Everyone sprang into action. We cleared space between the forest and the cabin, ensuring it would burn to the ground without spreading or needing to be extinguished. There was a lake nearby, but we didn't have the equipment to put out a fire. It was also too dangerous for us to be near it. Our skin was rock solid, but incredibly flammable. The nomads were here. But we followed a fresh scent, Edwards and a human. Eliezer rushed to our group, relieved as he spoke. Everyone mirrored his relief. Edward took out all three of them? That's badass, Emmett remarked, impressed. Which direction were they headed? I asked Eliezer. Eliezer started to run as he responded, the group following him. They went north. As we approached the trail, I caught Edward and Bella's scent. It was very fresh, they were definitely alive. I sighed in relief. Alice, do you see anything? Emmett asked. Her eyes widened and she exuded shock, but tried to hide her reaction. Edward went to the lodge, she squeaked. We were already running and headed in that direction. He probably needed a safe place to take his mate. I'm sure his Bella is so frightened, Kate remarked, with compassion. If Tanya gives Bella a hard time, I will deal with her, Emmett noted. His protectiveness of Bella was not surprising. Emmett was the most loyal member of the family. As Edward's mate, human or not, Bella was one of us. You're not going to lay a hand on my sister, Irnia glared at Emmett. I sent calm towards both of them. Kate intervened. We'll talk to Tanya, Emmett. Don't worry. Alice glanced at me, clearly wanting to talk in private, but didn't say a word. As we were running, she slowed so that we were at the back of the pack. I thought Alice would want to be the first one to see Edward and Bella, but she was apprehensive and a little afraid. What's wrong? I whispered. The others were yards ahead of us and I spoke low enough for them to not hear. Edward and Bella won't be there, but they did make a visit. Are they all right? I asked, concerned. They're in better condition than Tanya. Irenia and Kate became hysterical when they arrived at the lodge at the sight of Tanya dismembered, kneeling down to pick up the pieces. I'm going to call Carlyle, Alice told me, leaving to go outside. I nodded and remained to stable the emotions in the room. The Denali coven, even though they considered us family, might want to retaliate. I had to keep things calm. Emmett and Rosalie were speechless. Carmen and Eleazar glanced at each other. Edward didn't intend to kill her. If he had, he would have set her on fire like he did the others. Eleazar spoke carefully. Edward's scent was all over the room. It was obvious he had been the perpetrator. Why would Edward do this to Tanya? Irnia sobbed. I don't understand. I ignored her question. Alice is calling Carlyle. He'll be here soon to help mend Tanya. She'll be all right, eventually. Kate and Irnia picked up the pieces of Tanya. The three sisters had been together for over 1,000 years. Their loyalty was first and foremost to one another. We don't need Carlyle's help, Kate hissed. We will take care of our sister by ourselves. You are no longer welcome here. Leave now. Irenia glared at me, Emmett and Rosalie. Go. Emmett was not one to be intimidated easily. She probably deserved it, he remarked, turning to leave. Irenia screamed and lunged for Emmett's neck. How dare you talk about my sister like that? Eleazar and Carmen intercepted Irnia, while Kate remained with Tanya's body parts. Alice returned and stood defensively by my side, along with an irate Rosalie. Emmett looked amused. Carmen and Eleazar had only been with the sisters for 100 years or so. They were not filled with the animosity and anger the sisters were feeling, but they felt conflicted about where their loyalty lay. They were also confused. You should go, Eleazar advised, gently. We'll talk and find out what happened when we've all calmed down. I nodded, sending Irnia an extra dose of relaxation. I wasn't mad at her, she was only trying to defend her sister. But I wasn't going to let her attack my brother either. Alice, Emmett, Rosalie and I left the lodge immediately and ran until we were out of the hearing range of the others. Should I call Carlyle and tell him not to come? Alice asked. What will happen if he does? She paused, looking at the future. They'll allow Carlyle to help. But things will never be the same between our families. No kidding, Emmett remarked. What the hell happened? Why did Edward tear Tanya apart like that? Alice and I looked at each other. I have a theory, only going by the emotions I was reading from the nomads, that they believed Tanya when she referred to Bella as Edward's human pet. They didn't realize she was being sarcastic. They thought that Bella was literally Edward's personal resource of blood. I don't know how they found the cabin, but they obviously did and I'm sure Edward went ballistic. Remember how he's been acting around us when Bella came to the house? That's how he treated his family. Can you imagine how he would treat a nomad that wanted to drain her? They had no chance. Emmett and Rosalie nodded, understanding, as all vampires did, the protectiveness that one felt for one's mate. Edward and Bella's relationship seemed especially intense, maybe because she was a human, or for some other reason. Anyone who tried to harm Bella, or even think about harming her, would be dead. The nomads probably mentioned Tanya, Rosalie added. Instead of waiting for an explanation from us, he reacted immediately. Tanya had no chance, either. He didn't kill her, Alice reminded us, but he definitely wanted to send a message. Don't fuck with my mate, Emmett chimed in, laughing. Rosalie jabbed him in the ribs. I don't think Tanya intentionally tried to hurt Bella. It wasn't her fault that the nomads misunderstood, Rosalie replied. It was careless of her to speak so freely around strangers, I pointed out. I turned to face my mate. Alice, do you see where Edward and Bella are? We should find them. Edward was so upset he wouldn't even answer my call. Bella said he was freaking out, which meant he's gone into animal mode. Alice paused, her eyes glazing over in concentration. She broke from her trance, a mixture of concern and excitement overcoming her. Bella is burning. She's becoming one of us. The burning did not stop. It only increased. Surely, I had gone to hell. The pain was excruciating and indescribable. I couldn't open my eyes, but I could hear and feel what was going on around me. Someone was holding me in his arms, kissing my forehead, caressing my cheek. It was intended to be comforting, and it was good to know I wasn't alone in this hell, but it did not lessen the pain. Occasionally the person holding me would purr and the sound of it echoed, as if we were deep in a cave. All I could concentrate on was the flames trying to consume me. Always burning, never extinguished. Despite the pain, the thing that hurt most was that I would never see Edward again. Edward would not be in this hell with me. He was too good to be exiled here. I would never look into his eyes, hear his voice, touch his body. Knowing him had been like being given a glimpse of paradise and then have it violently ripped away. I couldn't exist without him. I felt my heartbeat slow down. Thump, 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 silence. I opened my eyes and blinked. I was no longer in pain. I felt powerful. In an instant, I jumped up on my feet in one quick motion. It was so easy to move. I looked around in the darkness, knowing I wasn't alone. I felt defensive and scared. "Who's there?" I demanded. A figure stepped forward from the shadows. Edward. I lunged, wrapping my arms around him and holding him tight. I wanted to cry, but tears would not form. "Edward, you're here. I thought I'd never see you again." I was nearly hysterical and began to cover his face with kisses. His arms were around me, but he was unusually stiff. Realizing he hadn't said anything, I paused and looked into his eyes. "What's wrong?" I asked. Even in the darkness, I could see that his eyes were black and his face rigid. He cupped my cheek with his hand, but didn't speak. "Edward," I whispered. He was looking at me, but something was different about him. My memories felt blurry. I remembered bits and pieces, as if the past were scenes from an old, black and white movie. Edward and I together in the cabin, our intimacy, the interruption. The burning body parts of James, Victoria and Laurent. I glanced down at my arm, the one Victoria had ripped open with her teeth, expecting to see a bandage. I gasped at the sight of an unblemished arm, no blood or scab, only a faint crescent scar. Had Edward taken me to the hospital? How could I heal so fast? How long had I been in that burning pain? "What happened?" I asked. "Where are we?" Edward acted as if I hadn't spoken, but he wasn't ignoring me. He was smoothing my hair, looking deeply into my eyes. It was as if he was hypnotized, fully alert, but not responsive. I sighed, and as soon as I inhaled, my throat caught on fire. It wasn't the same sensation as the burning, but it was painful. I felt like I was desperately, unquenchably thirsty. I grabbed my throat with my hand, shocked at the intensity of the thirst. Suddenly, Edward seemed to snap out of whatever trance he was in. He grunted, took my hand into his and started running. I followed without question. Never had I been athletic, but running felt easy. We were deep in a cave, and it took a few moments to come to the surface. I was surprised at how full of color the forest was, how I noticed details of the leaves, the dimensions of the sunlight shining through the clouds. It was as if I was wearing amazing contact lenses. Before everything was so dull, but now everything I saw so alive. As we were running, I caught the scent of something. I could hear the thump of a dozen heartbeats. It was so clear that the sound scared me. Could someone be playing a surround sound stereo in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness? I looked around to check, but we were alone. Edward led me to a meadow, and there I saw a herd of deer. He looked at me and tilted his head, as if to say, "Watch." The herd scattered, but Edward already had one in his hands and plunged his teeth into its neck. I saw him drinking the animal's blood, and instead of frightening me, it did something else. An overpowering feeling took control of my body, and I chased after the deer and began to do what Edward did. I bit into one's neck and began to drink its blood. And then another. And another. And another. When I finally came to my senses, I looked back at Edward and saw a trail of dead deer between him and me. I looked at my hands and down at my clothes, and I was covered in blood. I began to panic. I just killed all those deer, drank their blood, and liked it. The blood didn't satisfy me completely, but it did take a fraction of thirst away. Where did I get the strength to do such a thing? Why did I do it? What have I become? I murmured to myself, starting to sob, but no tears escaped. Realizing my distress, Edward was immediately by my side, putting his arms around me, holding me tightly. His touch brought relief and I stopped sobbing. Edward began purring and licking my neck. It felt ticklish, but also incredibly arousing. I giggled, my mood completely changed from panic to relaxation. "Edward, what are you doing?" He kissed my bottom lip and I realized his touch felt warm. Odd. He'd always felt cold before. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw snowflakes falling from the sky. I looked down at my bloody clothes and realized I wasn't wearing a coat, but my body wasn't cold at all. I felt perfectly comfortable. Edward pulled me closer, titled his head, and pressed his mouth fully against mine. His lips parted and he licked my bottom lip with his tongue. I gasped in surprise, and was even more surprised when he pushed his tongue farther into my mouth. The sensation of our tongues touching ignited a passion within me. I responded instinctively, but I knew Edward had never kissed me this way before. I vaguely remembered him telling me his kisses would be too dangerous for me, but now he seemed to be kissing me the way he always wanted to and I wasn't going to complain. After all the pain I had been through, Edward hurting me was the least of my fears. I closed my eyes as we kissed. It was passionate, urgent, but gentle, too. Edward's tongue flickered and circled my tongue, and he nibbled and sucked on my upper lip. I responded by exploring his mouth and he tasted wonderfully. Excitement began to build, our breathing increased, and I felt like every part of my body was electrified. Suddenly, Edward stopped and leaned back. His expression reminded me of the one he gave when we were making love. I remembered that Edward could read other people's thoughts. Was someone coming to meet us? Instead of feeling panicked, I felt oddly relaxed. The emotion conflicted with what I knew instinctively I was supposed to feel, on guard. Edward looked around the forest and when he settled on a direction, he stood in front of me, but crouched into a defensive position, ready to attack. The trees rustled and 2 men and 1 woman stood before us. Their eyes were not blood red, like the vampires Edward had destroyed, but somehow I knew they were vampires. I could smell them and they each had a unique scent. Before I realized what I was doing, a growl came from deep within my body and I parted my lips to show my teeth. If Edward had not been holding me back, I think I would have attacked. "Bella, it's me Carlisle," a gentle voice greeted. "I'm here with Jasper and Alice." I calmed slightly, immediately embarrassed that I had reacted that way, but I still felt uneasy. Carlisle. Edward's father. I remembered meeting him, but he looked different to me now. It was the same when I glanced at Alice. She looked different, too. Sharper, more clearly defined. Jasper, he looked scary. I'd never noticed the crescent-shaped scars on his neck before. They looked the same as the one on my arm. Were they bite marks? How did he get those? How did he survive? Jasper smiled at me and I relaxed. Edward didn't speak to his family, but remained crouched. He didn't growl, but I was afraid that any moment he would attack them. He was too rigid, too tense. I put a hand on his shoulder. "Edward, it's all right. It's your family." I didn't fully trust his family, but I didn't think they would hurt us, either. After being attacked by the trio of vampires, and then hours, days, weeks, who knows how long, of being in pain, the only person I trusted at that moment was Edward. But something made me feel like we were safe. He didn't respond and his family were motionless, but watching us closely. I leaned down to whisper into his ear. "Edward, they won't hurt us." He examined the family for a moment, then grunted and stood up. But, instead of simply holding my hand, he wrapped me in a full embrace, his grip tight. I had to turn to my head and peek around Edward's shoulder to look at them. It seemed like Edward had forgotten how to speak, so I took the initiative. I didn't know if the family knew what had happened to us. A group of vampires found us at the cabin. They attacked me and Edward retaliated. He set the cabin on fire and burned up their bodies. Then, I think he took me to this cave and that's where we've been. I'm not sure. I was in so much pain until today. Carlisle's eyes were full of compassion. "I'm so sorry that you had to face this all alone. As soon as we realized you were in danger, the family came to help, but it was too late." I shook my head. There was no reason for him to apologize. It was a surprise. You couldn't have known. Besides, Edward took care of it. Despite the gruesomeness of the whole ordeal, I was proud of Edward for protecting me. I survived, thanks to him, and that's all that mattered. Alice seemed to be bursting at the seams, having a hard time not talking. I looked at her curiously. It seemed to give her permission to talk. Bella, you look beautiful. How do you feel? She asked excitedly. I scrunched up my face. I was covered in blood, my hair was a mess, and I'd apparently been living in a cave. How could I look beautiful? And I'd also just drank from the blood of animals. Maybe I have a post-traumatic stress disorder, I thought. I wasn't ashamed at killing the animals. I only wanted more. I answered honestly. I feel thirsty. Jasper nodded, seeming to expect my answer. And you've hunted? I guess that's what you'd call it. I looked at Edward, who was glaring at his family. Do you know why Edward is acting like this? I asked. I was worried. He looked incredibly stressed out. He won't speak to me, but he seems to know what's going on. He feels threatened. After all you've been through, he's reverted to operating completely by instinct. He'll recover, but it may take a while. I would be with him as long as it took to recover, and even if he never spoke to me again, I would never leave his side. What can I do to help him? I asked. Assure him that you're safe. Be with him. It seems simple enough. I nodded. I have no idea where we are, but can we get a ride back to my cabin in Fairbanks? The three of them exchanged uneasy glances. Carlyle shook his head. You can't return to your cabin, Bella. It's not safe. I was confused and outraged. What do you mean it's not safe? It's not safe for you to be around the humans, Alice jumped in to explain. These vampires were being weird. I didn't understand. I'm a human, too. Remember? I pointed out. Do you mean it's not safe for Edward to be around humans because of the way he's acting? That made more sense to me. If he acted this way towards his family, how much more stressed out would he be around strangers? Bella, you're not a human anymore, Alice answered. Easy now, Jasper interrupted, putting a hand on Alice's shoulder, not taking his eyes off Edward. I began to feel nervous. What did she mean I wasn't human anymore? 1,000 images flashed through my mind at once. Victoria biting me. The burning. Running so quickly. Seeing so sharply. Hearing so loudly. Drinking the blood of animals. Edward taking no caution in kissing me. I gasped. You're one of us now, Carlyle told me. We're not sure who changed you, but it happened. I did feel different, but it was such an impossible thing to imagine. Could it be true? I can explain everything to you, Carlyle offered, if you just come with us. At the words "come with us," Edward growled loudly, venom dripping from his mouth. In a flash, he threw me over his shoulder and began to run. In the distance, I could hear his family call out to him, but Edward did not listen. You're one of us now. Carlyle's words echoed in my head as Edward and I returned to the cave. The family did not follow us, and I was thankful for this. Edward would have surely attacked. Even once we were in the privacy and security of the cave, Edward placed me in a corner and crouched in front of me, still growling, venom still dripping from his mouth. I confess I didn't pay much attention to Edward's behavior in that moment, as I tried to digest the news that I had been changed. I was a vampire. I didn't know whether to be happy or sad. On one hand, I knew this meant I could be with Edward forever as his equal, my human frailty no longer an issue for us. But it also meant I could never return to my old life. As Alice said, it wasn't safe for me to be around humans. I thirsted for their blood. It may take years to be able to withstand temptation. Would I never see my parents again? What about my job and school? My memories felt so blurry, but I tried hard to focus on the details Edward told me about vampires. He never told me how a person became one, but that vampires thirsted human blood and his family chose to drink from animals. Their self-control allowed them to be able to interact with human society, go to school, hold jobs. But it was doubtful I would be able to return to the bookstore or finish my degree any time in the near future. I had so many questions, but Edward wasn't able to answer them right now. It was obvious he was in deep stress and I didn't know how to help him. But I was going to try. I stood on my knees and leaned forward, pressing my body against his back, wrapping my arms around him. I kissed him on the neck. Edward, we're safe, I whispered into his ear. He grunted and shook his head. Okay, so he seemed to understand me. This was progress. I put my hands on his shoulders and began to massage. Could vampires have tense muscles? For Edward it certainly seemed so. I felt him physically react to my touch and relax, but only a fraction. I kissed him again, under his earlobe, and continued to massage. He stopped growling and his breathing became even. My hands moved from his shoulders, to rubbing his back and running my fingers through his hair. I took my time, enjoying touching him as much as he seemed to like to be touched. In a flash of a second, Edward turned around and lifted me up, so that we're both standing and facing one another. His eyes were still black, but there was a spark of desire. It wasn't what I expected, but I welcomed it. He cupped my face with his hands and kissed me, hard. His hands roamed all over me and he began to rip my clothes off my body. I gasped in surprise, but found myself doing the same thing to him. It was so effortless, the cotton and denim ripping as they were pieces of tissue. With his hand cupped against my head, he pressed me against the wall of the cave and pulled my leg up against his hip, pressing his groin against me. Grinding against me, he was not being gentle, but he wasn't hurting me either. Tilting my head back, I moaned as I felt his throbbing erection press into me. I rolled my hip against his, but he pushed me against the wall. I leaned my head forward, licking and tugging on his ear, wrapping my leg around his waist. I didn't realize I could be so flexible. I spread my legs more and Edward began to thrust. He groaned as I gripped his biceps and thrusted back up against him, giving it back to him as hard as he was giving it. I felt my core tighten around his member, the sound of our skin smacking against each other echoing throughout the cave. I shifted myself up, so that both legs were wrapped around Edward's waist, and he squeezed my bottom, going even deeper inside me than before. I groaned in pleasure and Edward licked my lips and continued to thrust hard and deep, faster and faster. Euphoria hit me with such a force that it seemed to affect Edward as well. His last thrusts were erratic, but forceful. Panting, he collapsed against me, leaning his head on my shoulder. I wrapped my arms around Edward and felt him relax inside me. He pulled me down to the ground, where he laid on top of me, but continued to nuzzle his face in the crook of my neck. "I love you," I whispered, my eyes closed, feeling the warmth of his embrace and intimacy I felt with him after our love-making. The sound of his voice surprised me. "I love you, too," Edward responded, his tone vulnerable. Running my fingers through his hair, I sighed happily. My Edward was back. However, it took several more sessions of love-making for Edward to be able to hold an actual conversation with me. I didn't know how much time passed, but I felt an unquenchable desire for Edward. I always wanted more of him. After a while, the burning in my throat, my thirst, began to dominate my attention. It disappointed me to know that while I wanted Edward, at that moment I wanted blood more. With Edward seemingly back to his old self, I thought it would be safe to suggest hunting. I didn't think I could go another second without relief. When enough time passed after our last joining together, I told him my need. "I'm thirsty," I acknowledged, embarrassed to be so needy and dependent. Would I feel this way for the rest of eternity? Edward nodded, understanding. "Let's hunt." I looked down at my naked body and the pile of shredded clothes on the floor of the cave. "I have nothing to wear, what if we see someone?" Edward visibly tensed and I immediately regretted bringing up the possibility of others. I didn't want him to feel so threatened again, although it seemed like the worst had passed. He looked at the blankets, also on the floor, the ones he had wrapped me in when we left the cabin. "I'll make something to cover us," he offered, leaning down and picking up the cloth. He worked fast, but it was no longer in a blur. I saw his hands moving quickly as he fashioned a toga-like dress for me to wear. For himself, he wrapped a loincloth around his waist. Being in a cave, wrapping ourselves in cloth, felt very primitive and caveman-like. Edward had already thrown me over his shoulder like a caveman. I smiled, thinking about what a far cry it was from the Cullen mansion and Edward's fancy things at home. Edward returned my smile, looking at me curiously. "If only I could read your mind," he commented, shaking his head. I shrugged, thinking that if he was able to read my mind, the most dominant thought was about my thirst. I swallowed, feeling the pain of burning. "Let's get you fed, shall we?" It was amazing that the last time Edward had probably said that to me was when he was cooking me bacon and eggs for breakfast when I was a human. Now the words had an entirely different connotation. I nodded and he took my hand, leading me out of the cave. I desperately hoped his family did not interrupt us again. I wanted to see them, but I didn't know how fragile Edward felt. Thankfully, we were able to hunt in peace and do so until I felt almost satisfied, but not quite. I seemed my thirst would always be there, but after hours of hunting, the pain was a bit more manageable. "So what are we going to do now?" I asked Edward, as we walked hand in hand, through the snow, to nowhere in particular. We weren't heading in the direction of the cave. We're going somewhere you'll be safe, he answered firmly, squeezing my hand. Oh. I didn't know if I liked the sound of that. EPOV. So what are we going to do now? Bella asked. We're going somewhere you'll be safe, I answered firmly. I was glad to be able to communicate in sentences instead of grunts. Making love to Bella, truly consummating our bond without human precautions, helped me to begin to return to rational thought. Somewhere safe? Bella asked. Where would that be? With my family, I answered. Really? She was surprised. I nodded. While we were hunting, I heard their thoughts. All 6 of them began to persuade me to bring you home. I smiled wryly. None of them were confident I was paying attention to their thoughts, but they still tried to communicate with me. Carlisle and Esme were gentle and encouraging. We love you both. Please let us help you. Alice was impatient, Jasper supportive. Don't steal my new sister from me. I understand how you feel. Emmett was funny, and Rosalie had been the most persistent and annoying of them all. Bro, you have to return to us so we can kick some more, Denali asked together. Come home, come home, come home, come home, come home, come home. Are you okay with that? You didn't react too well the last time you saw them. Bella was being gracious with me, as she always was. No, I didn't react too well. She had no idea how close I had come to attacking my own family. Jasper felt it, I knew, but Carlisle and Alice weren't aware of it either. I still operating fully on instinct, and when they approached us, I was going to tear them to pieces, but I wanted to stay with Bella to keep her safe. The 3 of them together reminded me too much of the 3 nomads, even though their thoughts were very different. I regret that. I was still recovering from what happened. I still felt threatened and wanted to protect you. Instinct took over. But I think I'm calming down. Dot and my family made a convincing argument you're a newborn and need support. At some point, all of them had mentioned that Bella being with the family during her newborn year would be helpful. The most convincing arguments came from those I had witnessed being newborns, Esme, Rosalie and Emmett. They all reminded me of their mood swings and thirst and how the others guided them through it. As much as I wanted to be alone with Bella, I knew as a newborn she needed support. Newborn? Bella asked. Of course. She had never heard the term before. We'd never had one conversation about what it meant to become a vampire, especially one that followed our diet. I regretted that deeply. I didn't prepare her. She was forced into this life. When Victoria bit into Bella, something within me snapped. I was already almost incoherently protective, but injuring my mate physically pushed me over the edge. Laurent had been trying to actually help Bella. He had a crush on Irnia and thought he would impress her and stay in my family's good graces if he helped. Other than the Velutri, there weren't any covens as large as the Cullens. Laurent was right to be intimidated. We were dangerous, if we chose to be. A rage I never knew was possible rose within me. A red haze blinded me and instinct took over completely. I barely realized what I was doing. With ease, I tore Laurent and Victoria to pieces. James was too stunned to move, but by the time he did, I had finished with his partners and then ripped him from limb to limb. Apart from caring for Bella, my entire being cried kill, kill, kill. It wasn't until I left Tanya's that I was able to pause and realize Bella was being changed. I was glad she wasn't dying, but I was disappointed it was Victoria's venom that was changing her and not mine. As we were running, I sucked Victoria's venom out of Bella's blood, almost to the point of killing her. It was dangerous and selfish of me, but Bella was my mate. I wanted my venom to change her. I wasn't thinking rationally. If I had been in my right mind, I would have considered keeping Bella human. But my animalistic side wanted to claim her. I didn't know if I was successful, but when Bella awoke, her new vampire scent had a touch of my own. Bella was magnificent and I breathed a sigh of relief, mentally, when she awoke and instantly recognized me. We all carried a hint of our sire's scent and I made the right decision. But, now that I was thinking rationally, I regretted I hadn't prepared her for it all. I had no idea what she thought about it, either. Did she feel like a monster? You're a newborn vampire, I explained, regret in my voice. I'm sorry it happened this way, that you didn't have a choice. I stopped walking and looked into her eyes. Tell me what you're thinking. Do you hate what you've become? She shook her head. I'm like you now. I didn't know it was possible and I have a million questions, but because of it we can be together forever. How could I hate that? I stroked her cheek with my hand, feeling full of love for her. You're too generous, I whispered and leaned down to kiss her. Bella sighed. Thank you for protecting me, for saving me, she said. My eyes widened. There was no need to thank me for what was instinctual. You're my mate. I'd do anything to keep you safe. She wrapped her arms around my neck and pulled me down to kiss her again. After a few moments, I began to hear Alice yelling at me. You can do that when you get home. You've kept us waiting too long. If you keep kissing Bella, it will be another few days before you return, and I'm impatient. I stopped kissing Bella and began to laugh softly. It felt good to laugh, after the intensity of the last few days. Bella looked at me curiously, smiling, and I explained. Alice is telling me that if we continue kissing like this, it'll be days before we make it back home. Her smile widened. Well, she can see the future. Do you really want to see Irnia or Kate? You'll snap back into warrior mode. Bella is a newborn. She shouldn't have to calm you down. It'll be safer if you were home, now. I sighed. Alice is right. It would be safer if we left the area. Bella panicked. Are we in danger? I shook my head. No, but if I see the Denali sisters, there will be a confrontation. They're not happy with what I did to their sister. To keep the peace, we should probably never see them again. What happened? What did you do? I knew Bella wasn't aware of what I had done to Tanya. I had never told her about the Denali clan, and she wouldn't have understood what Laurent meant when he mentioned Tanya. I took my hand and we began to run. Tanya, one of the Denalis that we consider to be trusted family, told the nomads that you were my human pet. It made them curious and they came looking for us. If I had been more rational at the time, I would have realized she was being sarcastic and the nomads misunderstood her. But, once my primal instincts took over, it was too hard to suppress. I had to retaliate. Tanya had to pay for what she did. You didn't kill her, though, she noted, apparently remembering I didn't set fire to Tanya's lodge the way he did to the nomads at his cabin. No, when I heard you whimpering on the porch, a tiny shred of my remaining humanity distracted me. Tanya should thank you. I spared her life because of you. It was true. I was so close to finishing Tanya off until I heard Bella. Our families would have surely gone to war if I had killed Tanya. Since she would eventually recover, perhaps there wouldn't be war, but there would never be peace. Will her family want revenge? I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant and not worry Bella. Tanya will recover. If we keep our distance, things will probably be fine. I wasn't so confident about that, though. Bella still looked worried and I squeezed her hand. Don't worry. You're safe. If they do try to attack, it will be 7 vampires against 3. It won't even be a fair fight. 8, Bella corrected. I can fight, too. The idea of Bella fighting terrified me, but I grinned. Looking at her, it was clear she wasn't a weak human anymore, but I wouldn't let her be in danger. Yes, you can fight, but it's my job as your maid to make sure that you don't need to. Relationship rules still apply. We decided to make decisions together. Talk about things. Remember? I stopped running and turned to face Bella. She was completely right. I was already making decisions for her by telling her we were returning to my family. She deserved to be consulted and be able to voice her opinion. I respected her and wanted to prove it. You're completely right. I should have asked first, do you want to return to my family? BPOV Edward's question was unexpected, but I understood why he was asking. He had made a decision for us, without talking to me about it. I'd met all of his family members, heard many stories about them, but I barely knew them. It was a valid question. His question also reminded me of a conversation we had when I was human. He said he would leave his family if I asked him to. I remembered how sincere he was and I remembered how I felt I would never ask him to do such a thing. I was alone, basically, but Edward had a family. Brothers and sisters. A mother and father. A vampire family, definitely unconventional, but it was a family nonetheless. I didn't know what to expect, whether they would welcome me or not, but I wanted to give it a try for Edward's sake. Yes, I think returning to your family is the right thing to do. He smiled. I'll always feel protective of you, but I trust my family. They're really looking forward to spending time with you, if I choose to share you. He squeezed my bottom and pressed me into him. Desire ignited within me. I smiled. Maybe Alice was right. Maybe it will be a few days before we see them. Edward kissed my neck. We'll have plenty of time to be alone together, once we're home. I groaned, feeling surprised at how quickly my mood changed from desire to annoyance. Maybe this is what Edward needed when he said a newborn needed support. Okay, I grumbled, holding his hand and pouting like a child. He put his hand on my chin and kissed me on the lips, but didn't say anything. We began to run again and didn't stop until we were in the woods behind the Cullen Lodge. I tensed, picking up the sense of the family. I didn't know how to be a vampire, but this part felt instinctual. I remembered Carlisle, Alice and Jasper's scents clearly, but there were 3 others that were unfamiliar. I guessed they belonged to Esme, Rosalie and Emmett. I felt suspicious and on guard. I gripped Edward's hand so hard until he winced in pain. I released my hand, shocked that I had the strength to physically hurt him. Sorry, I gasped. He shook his hand. It's fine. As a newborn you're much stronger than me. You're stronger than our entire family, even Emmett. He's already thinking of arm wrestling you. I smiled at Edward's joke. There was no way Emmett would want to arm wrestle me. I was too small and weak to be a challenge. We slowly walked up to the back of the house. Edward seemed to know I needed time to acclimate myself to the sense of other vampires. Surprisingly, Alice was the only one to greet us. She bounded out into the snow to throw her arms around Edward and me. Both of us were rigid, but didn't stop her from hugging us. Edward, Bella, welcome home, she exclaimed, then stepped back to look at us head to toe. Interesting outfits, she added, disapprovingly, noticing the toga and loincloth Edward fashioned out of blankets. Alice, it's good to see you, Edward replied warmly. I was glad to see him relaxed and not growling at his sister. Hi, I greeted shyly. Where was the rest of the family? If they were so anxious for us to return, why didn't they come to meet us like Alice? We have a surprise for you too, Alice interrupted my thoughts. Really? Edward asked, with an eyebrow raised. He once told me there were no secrets in his family, due to his mind reading and Alice's future telling. Alice nodded. It was difficult to keep it from you, but we did. I think you'll like it. She grabbed my hand and began to walk off, then stopped herself. Before I show you the surprise, we need to do something about your clothes. She looked at Edward and he nodded. I wondered if other family members got annoyed at their silent conversations. I followed Alice and Edward into the lodge and to Edward's bedroom. Alice disappeared for a second and then returned with a pile of clothes in her hand. For you, she said, handing them to me. As she closed the door, she waved her finger. 5 minutes only, no time for hanky-panky. I felt embarrassed, but I couldn't blush at Alice's assumption. Was everyone in Edward's family so open about things like that? After all, Alice was the one who gave Edward condoms. Noticing my discomfort, Edward hugged me. All newly mated couples desire time to themselves, not just us. Alice didn't mean to embarrass you. I don't think she realizes that because we met when you were human you're still learning what it means to be mated. So much to learn, I sighed. Edward cupped my breast and nuzzled my neck, and all the time in the world. I felt I would melt as Edward tore the toga off me, but he redressed me quickly, making it clear we would not be getting intimate. I tried not to show my disappointment. He also dressed himself quickly, took my hand and led me back outside. Alice was waiting for us. She smiled and waved for us to follow her. She ran into the woods and then came to a clearing, where there stood a cabin that looked almost exactly like mine old dry cabin in Fairbanks. The door opened and the other family members came walking out. It's yours, Alice squealed. I looked at Edward, then back at Alice and the family. You built us a cabin? Esme nodded. We did the same for Emmett and Rosalie when they met. We thought it would be good for you to have a place of your own, but still be near the family. Oh, the Cullens and their generosity. A very extravagant welcome home present. Welcome to the family, Bella, Carlisle greeted, but he kept his distance. Rosalie and I welcome you to the family, too, Emmett added, his arm around his wife. I had already seen Carlisle, Jasper and Alice with vampire eyes, but now it was like I was seeing Rosalie and Emmett for the first time. Rosalie was even more beautiful, if that was possible, than I remembered. Emmett was also much larger and intimidating than I remembered, too. Rosalie wasn't smiling like Emmett, but his smile was almost exaggerated. His personality seemed larger than life, almost like a perfect older brother. I was looking forward to getting to know him better. Jasper nodded and I smiled. I suspected he was the one making me feel calmer and open to trusting the family. I did feel very comfortable with them, once my initial suspicions of new vampires settled. Edward remained holding my hand as the family began to greet him. Esme gave him a long hug, Rosalie gave a shorter hug, and Emmett punched him in the arm. Carlyle shook his hand and Jasper nodded, probably communicating with emotions than physically touching him. It was fascinating to watch the family interact with Edward. Their affection for him was genuine. They seemed relieved to see him. Even though my human memories were fuzzy, I didn't remember having that connection with Charlie or Renee. The Cullens may be vampires, but it was clear they really were a family. They loved one another. There was a lot to talk about, after all that had happened, but I began to feel anxious and overwhelmed. I stood silently, though, listening to them all talk. My mood felt erratic and irrational. I was happy to be with the family, but I also felt irritable. Jasper glanced at me. Then Edward immediately stopped talking and looked at me. "Would you like to see inside?" he asked me. I nodded, welcoming the chance to be alone with him. I smiled shyly at the family and followed Edward inside the cabin. The layout was exactly the same as my old place, but the details and furnishings were much better. I gasped when I noticed my own books on the bookshelf. I looked around and noticed several other personal belongings. My things. I hadn't thought about it, but I was very happy to have familiar things surrounding me. My irritability calmed down. Edward smiled. "Nice touch," he agreed. Carlyle and Esme joined us inside. "Do you like it?" Esme asked. She seemed as shy as me. I instantly felt connected with her. Although Edward was still holding my hand, with my other free hand, I hugged Esme. "Thank you, Esme. It's wonderful." She smiled and glanced at Edward. "It's perfect," he told her. "How did you get my things?" I asked. "Emmett and Rosalie went and collected them. We had to concoct a story about your disappearance, since you're a newborn and won't be able to encounter humans for at least a year," Carlyle answered. Esme nodded. "Thankfully, we have a lot of experience in covering our tracks." "What's the story?" Edward asked. "Well, Alice called UAF posing as Bella and explained she would be withdrawing from classes this semester and taking a year off to travel. We also said the same thing to your landlord and paid your rent for several months in advance, so there was no penalty in breaking your lease so suddenly." Carlyle personally visited Dave at the bookstore and explained to him that Bella and Edward had eloped. Eloped? I had to laugh at that. Not because it was unbelievable, but because in a way, we had eloped. We ran away and didn't plan on coming back. My mind drifted to my parents. What would I tell them? I rarely called and could go a year without seeing them. Maybe I could simply email and say I was traveling for a year and would keep in touch? Maybe a phone call? "I'll need to call my parents," I said, solemnly. Carlyle and Esme glanced at each other, then at Edward. "Love, I'm sorry, but you can't call them. The tone of your voice has changed and they'll know something is different." "Oh. Email was probably better anyway. On the phone they may ask too many questions. I'll email them, then." Edward looked at Carlyle and then back at me. He seemed to want to say more. "What? Email is fine for now, but you won't be able to see your parents again and eventually we're going to have to fake your death. I'm so sorry." My mouth opened in shock. Before, when Edward asked if I would leave my family, it had been a serious question. He knew it was a possibility. "Why? If they see you, they'll instantly know something has happened to you, and as a vampire, you're immortal. You won't age and your parents will notice. There aren't any vampire rules, other than to maintain secrecy. If your parents knew you were a vampire, they'd be in danger. We have to protect them," Carlyle answered. "We could have them think you ran away, but the kindest thing would be for them to have closure. Faking your death will give them a clean break." I sighed, feeling the weight of Carlyle's words. What he said made sense, but it was just a shock to realize I would never see my parents again. I felt sad about it, and yet, looking at Edward, I knew he was the most important person in my world. I would miss my parents, but Edward was my future. "I understand," I said quietly. Edward rubbed my back. "We'll send Charlie and Renee a check to make sure they're taken care of. Who knew you had a very generous life insurance policy?" I grinned at Edward's attempt to cheer me up, and also at his tendency to want to spend money on my behalf. Carlyle and Esme nodded, seeming to agree with Edward. "Whatever you think is best," I found myself saying. I had never faked a death before and it seemed like the Cullens had. I would trust their experience. "We don't have to do it now, darling," Esme spoke compassionately. You can email your parents and in a few months we'll discuss the details of it all. Okay, I replied. Esme patted my arm, then she and Carlyle disappeared in a flash, even fast by vampire standards. Edward and I were alone. He picked me up in his arms and carried me up to the loft and placed me on the bed. It reminded me so much of my cabin, even the sheets were the same. The familiarity made me feel as if I was home. I looked at Edward. Actually, home was wherever he was. Only a couple of weeks ago I was a fiercely independent, reclusive college student. I didn't think true love existed. Then, I met a man in the bookstore who made me feel complete. Something had been missing, but I didn't realize it until I met him. He was my other half. I smiled slightly, realizing how much Edward had changed my world. The end. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more such videos. And drop your reviews and new story ideas in comment section.